When a father discovers someone hurting his child, every instinct in his body screams one thing: protect them, stop the threat, do whatever it takes. Most parents say they would kill to protect their kids, but they never actually face that moment. They never have to make that choice. But some parents do. They walk into a nightmare. They see their child being hurt, and in that split second, they have to decide what to do. Some of them cross a line that can never be uncrossed. They stop the person hurting their child, and that person ends up dead. Then comes the aftermath. The 911 calls, the police, the investigations, the question everyone asks. Was it justified? Was it self-defense? Was it murder? Or was it simply a parent doing what any parent would do? Today we're covering parents who killed their child's abuser. These are the cases where mothers and fathers took justice into their own hands. Some walked free, some went to prison, but all of them made a choice in the worst moment of their lives, and that choice changed everything. Case number 1. Leon Gary Plauché was born on November 10, 1945, and lived a normal life in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He worked as a salesman for heavy equipment. Gary was married to a woman named June, and together they had 4 children. One of those children was a boy named Joseph Boyce Plauché, but everyone called him Jody. Jody was born in 1972, and by 1983, he was a healthy, energetic 10-year-old kid who loved sports. He played football, soccer, baseball, softball, and basketball. Gary and June seemed like a typical American family living in the South during the early 1980s. But behind closed doors, their marriage was falling apart. In August 1983, Gary and June separated. They were in the process of getting a divorce. Around the same time that Gary moved out of the family home, a man named Jeffrey Paul Doucette came into their lives. Jeff Doucette was born on February 3, 1959, in Port Arthur, Texas. By 1982, Doucette was working as a karate instructor in Baton Rouge. He had served in the Marine Corps and now taught a Korean martial art called Hapkido. Doucette lived at the karate studio where he taught, and during the day, he worked for his brother's carpet installation business. In January 1983, Doucette started advertising his karate classes by handing out flyers at local elementary schools, including Mayfair Elementary, where Jody was a 5th grader. Jody Plauché was not interested in karate at first. When he received the flyer at school, he crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. But his younger brother Mike got the same flyer and brought it home. June Plauché saw the flyer and thought karate lessons would be good for her sons. She signed up Jody, Mike, and their older brother, known as Bubba. The 3 boys started taking karate classes with Jeff Doucette in January 1983. At first, everything seemed normal. Doucette was 24 years old and seemed like a good teacher. He was patient, friendly, and helped the boys improve their physical fitness. Jody even won a trophy at a competition called the Fort Worth Pro-Am under Doucette's instruction. But Jeff Doucette was not the good person he appeared to be. He was a predator who knew exactly how to manipulate children and their families. Doucette did not rush into anything. He spent months building trust. He positioned himself as more than just a karate instructor. He became involved in the Plauché family's personal life. Doucette would come over to the family home for board game nights. He would sit on the couch with the family and watch television. He ate dinner with them. He became so close to the family that parents and children alike saw him as a friend, almost like an older brother figure to the boys. When Gary moved out of the house in August 1983, Doucette took advantage of the situation. With Gary gone, Doucette spent even more time with the family. He stepped into the role of a father figure, offering emotional support to June during the difficult divorce. According to some reports, June even began an intimate relationship with Doucette after Gary left. The family trusted Doucette completely. While all of this was happening, Doucette was slowly grooming Jody for sexual abuse. The grooming started in early 1983 during karate practice. Doucette would tell Jody that his inner thighs were tight and needed to be stretched. He would touch Jody's thigh and groin area during these stretches. At first, if his hand landed on Jody's private area, Doucette would pass it off as an accident. Over several months, Doucette kept testing boundaries, moving those boundaries further and further until there was no going back. Doucette also began isolating Jody from his other activities. Before karate, Jody played multiple sports and loved them all. But Doucette started pressuring Jody to quit his other sports and focus only on karate. Jody stopped playing football, soccer, softball, and basketball. He started spending more and more time alone with Doucette. One of the grooming techniques Doucette used was teaching Jody how to drive. One day, Doucette asked which of his young students wanted to learn to drive a car. Jody, who was only 10 years old, raised his hand immediately. Before long, Jody was sitting on Doucette's lap, steering a 280Z sports car, but then Doucette put his hands in Jody's lap. Jody thought it might be an accident at first, so he stayed quiet. He did not say anything to his parents. This was exactly what Doucette wanted. He was testing to see how far he could go without Jody telling anyone. During karate practice, Doucette would send the other students to a nearby store to buy snacks, but he would tell Jody to stay behind. He would say he needed to do extra work with Jody. Then Doucette would take Jody to the back room of the karate studio. That is where the sexual abuse began. By March 1983, Doucette was sexually abusing Jody on a regular basis. The abuse started with oral sex that Doucette performed on Jody. Over time, it escalated to anal rape. At the height of the abuse, Doucette was assaulting Jody almost every day, sometimes twice a day. The abuse happened at the karate studio, in motels during karate competitions, and sometimes even when other people were nearby. Gary's brother once saw Doucette kiss Jody on the mouth after a competition in Dallas. He reported this to Gary, but Gary did not believe him. Jody was trapped. He knew what was happening was wrong, but he could not tell anyone. Gary Plauché had a reputation for being protective of his children. He used to tell people that if anyone ever touched his kids, he would kill them. Jody knew his father was not joking. Jody was afraid that if he told his father what Doucette was doing, Gary would kill Doucette. So Jody stayed silent. He tried to come up with excuses to avoid going to karate practice, but Doucette would show up at the house anyway and drag him to class. June would let him go because she thought coaches knew best. Jody was stuck in a nightmare with no way out. By the winter of 1983 going into 1984, Doucette was in serious financial trouble. He owed money for bad checks he had written and had fallen into debt. He had a court date scheduled, and he knew he was going to face legal consequences. Doucette decided his best option was to run away, and because Jody had been his so-called love interest for the past year, Doucette decided to take the boy with him. On Sunday, February 19, 1984, Doucette put his plan into action. That day, Doucette's brother dropped him off at the Plauché home. Doucette went inside and told June that his brother had to leave, and that his father was building a new home for one of his karate students. He said the home needed new carpets installed, and he asked if he could borrow June's car to go check on the job. Then he asked if Jody could come with him. Doucette promised June that he would bring both the car and Jody back by the end of the day. June had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. She trusted Doucette completely. She agreed, and Jody left with Doucette. But Doucette did not take Jody to install carpets. Instead, he drove Jody to his brother's house in Gonzales, Louisiana, which is about 24 miles southeast of Baton Rouge. There, Doucette picked up some of his belongings. Then he drove to his mother's home in Port Arthur, Texas, a city right along the Louisiana border. The next day, February 20th, Doucette and Jody traveled to the home of Doucette's uncle in Vinton, Louisiana, which is just across the river from Texas. At his uncle's house, Doucette borrowed money for bus tickets. He told his mother, who was worried about Jody, that they were going to drop Jody off in Baton Rouge on the way to New York City. He said Baton Rouge would be along the route anyway. This was a lie. Doucette and Jody never went to Baton Rouge. Instead, they went to the town of Orange, Texas, which sits on the Texas-Louisiana border. From there, they boarded a Greyhound bus headed to Los Angeles, California. It was a journey of nearly 2,000 miles. Once they arrived in Los Angeles, they stayed for one night. Then they took another bus to Anaheim, California the next day. A few days after arriving in California, Doucette bought hair dye and dyed Jody's hair black. Jody had been a blonde child, and Doucette was trying to disguise him. Jody knew he had been kidnapped. He understood that what was happening was wrong, but he felt he had no choice except to go along with it. While Doucette and Jody were travelling across the country, the Plauché family was frantic. When Doucette did not return Jody by the end of the day on February 19th, June immediately called the police and reported her son missing. A massive search began. Jody's disappearance became a national news story. The police, the FBI, and Jody's family worked together to try to find him. They had no idea where Doucette had taken the boy. For 10 days, Jodie was held captive in California. Doucette took Jodie to Disneyland and to see the Hollywood sign, trying to act like they were on a fun vacation. But the sexual abuse continued. Jodie later said that Doucette seemed nervous during this time and appeared more restricted than he had been before. Jodie begged Doucette to let him call his mother. He asked over and over again. Doucette kept refusing, but eventually, Doucette ran out of money. He was getting desperate. Finally, on February 29, 1984, Doucette agreed to let Jodie make a phone call. Doucette allowed Jodie to place a collect call to his mother from their motel room. Jodie told his mother that he was safe and that he was in California. He spoke to her for about a minute. Then Doucette took the phone and spoke to June himself. He told her to gather her other 3 children and meet him in California the following morning. June tried to reason with Doucette. She told him that Gary might use the fact that Doucette had taken Jodie out of state to win custody of the children. This was something the police had suggested, she say, to try to convince Doucette to bring Jodie back. Eventually, June agreed to Doucette's plan. She wanted to keep her son safe. When Doucette hung up the phone, he had no idea that the FBI had placed a wiretap on the Plauché family's home phone. A deputy from the Baton Rouge Sheriff's Department had been listening to the entire conversation. As soon as the call ended, the deputy demanded that the phone operator tell him where the call had come from. The operator gave him the location. It was room 38 at a cheap motel in Anaheim, California. Within minutes, FBI agents and local police surrounded the motel. They broke down the door of room 38. Jodie was sitting on the bed watching television when the door burst open. Suddenly, guns were pointed at his face. The agents grabbed Jodie and took him out of the room. That was the last time Jodie ever saw Jeff Doucette. Doucette was arrested and taken into police custody without any resistance. Jodie was taken to the police station, where officers asked him if Doucette had touched him. Medical professionals performed a rape kit on Jodie. The results confirmed that Jodie had been sexually assaulted. On March 1, 1984, Jodie was reunited with his family back in Louisiana. He had been missing for 10 days. The abuse he suffered during those 10 days, combined with the year-long abuse that came before it, would haunt him for the rest of his life. Jeff Doucette was held in California, while authorities prepared to bring him back to Louisiana to face charges. On the plane ride back, Doucette confessed to deputies that he had molested not only Jodie, but other children as well. A grand jury in Louisiana indicted Doucette on charges of aggravated kidnapping. Once the rape kit results came back, authorities knew they would add charges of sexual assault. Doucette was going to face serious prison time, but he never got the chance to stand trial. While Jodie was reunited with his family, Gary Plauché was dealing with the horrible reality of what had happened to his son. In an interview with a local news crew, Gary said that after he heard reports that Doucette had sexually assaulted Jodie, he felt completely helpless. He did not know what to do or how to deal with the situation. Gary was consumed by rage and despair. According to his defense attorneys, Gary became so upset that he entered a temporary psychotic state. He could not sleep. He cried constantly. He paced back and forth in his home. He prayed. He developed feelings of intense hatred toward Doucette. But at the same time, he developed what he described as a sense of righteous mission. Gary later told doctors that he heard what he believed was the voice of Jesus, telling him that if he did not kill Doucette, Doucette would continue to harm Jodie and other children. Gary became convinced that he was the only person who could protect his son and stop Doucette forever. Dr. Edward Uzzi, a psychiatrist who examined Gary after the shooting, said that Gary could not tell the difference between right and wrong when he made the decision to kill Doucette. Gary believed he was acting on a divine command. On March 16, 1984, Jeff Doucette was flown back to Louisiana to face trial. He was scheduled to arrive at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport at around 9:30 in the evening. Gary Plauché found out exactly when Doucette would be arriving. An employee from WBRZ-TV, the local ABC television affiliate, had told Gary the time and location of Doucette's arrival. Gary decided that he was going to kill Doucette. He made careful plans. He later told people that he went to the airport that night expecting to die. He believed that either Doucette would die, or he would die, or both of them would die. He did not care what happened to him as long as Doucette was stopped. Gary arrived at the airport before Doucette's plane landed. He disguised himself by wearing dark sunglasses and a white baseball cap. He hid a Smith & Wesson .38 snub-nosed revolver in his right boot. He positioned himself near a bank of payphones in the airport terminal, directly across from where a WBRZ-TV news crew had set up their cameras. The news crew was there to film Doucette's arrival. The case had attracted a lot of media attention in Baton Rouge, and the station wanted to capture footage of the accused kidnapper and child molester being escorted through the airport. Gary stood at one of the payphones with his back turned to the area where Doucette would walk. He picked up the receiver and called his best friend, a man named Jimmy. Gary stayed on the phone, pretending to have a normal conversation while he waited. At around 9:30 p.m, Doucette's plane arrived. 2 deputies from the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Department, Lieutenant Bud Connor and Major Mike Barnett, were escorting Doucette. Doucette was handcuffed and walking between the 2 deputies as they led him through the airport terminal. The WBRZ news cameras were rolling, capturing every moment. As Doucette walked past the news crew, Gary whispered into the phone to his friend Jimmy, "Here he comes. You're about to hear a shot." Then Gary Plauché reached down to his boot, pulled out the .38 revolver, spun around, and fired a single shot. The bullet was a hollow point round. It struck Jeff Doucette on the right side of his head, near his right ear, at point-blank range from about 3 feet away. The gunshot was incredibly loud. Doucette immediately collapsed to the floor. Blood poured from the wound near his ear. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. Gary calmly placed the telephone receiver back on the hook. He did not try to run. He did not try to fire another shot. He simply stood there. Within seconds, the 2 deputies who had been escorting Doucette grabbed Gary. They forced him against the bank of payphones and wrestled the gun out of his hand. One of the deputies, who knew Gary personally, could be heard shouting in anguish, "Gary, why? Why, Gary?" The entire event was captured on video by the WBRZ news crew. The footage shows the moment Gary turned, aimed, and fired. It shows Doucette falling to the ground. It shows the deputies restraining Gary. The video would later be shown on national television and would eventually be viewed by millions of people around the world. Jeff Doucette was rushed to Charity Hospital in New Orleans. Doctors determined that the bullet had caused severe brain damage. Doucette fell into a coma. He was placed on life support. The hospital kept him alive for 1 more day so that medical staff could harvest his organs for donation. On March 17, 1984, the day after he was shot, Jeff Doucette's life support was turned off. He died without ever regaining consciousness. He was 25 years old. Gary Plauché was arrested immediately after the shooting. He was taken to the East Baton Rouge Parish Jail and booked on a charge of second-degree murder. The charge carried a potential sentence of life in prison. But Gary's case sparked an immediate and intense public reaction. Thousands of people called the jail and the district attorney's office, expressing support for Gary. Many people said that Gary had done what any parent would do. Some people even sent money to help pay for his legal defense. Friends of Gary posted a $100,000 property bond to get him out of jail. He was released on Monday, March 19th, just 3 days after the shooting. Gary's attorney, Foster Sanders, said that Gary's friends and supporters from around the country were contributing money for his defense. Sanders also said that sheriff's deputies had secretly released Gary because of serious threats made against his life. The case went to a grand jury. District Attorney Ozzie Brown presented evidence and asked the grand jury to consider formal charges. Gary's defense team argued that he should not be charged with murder. They said that Gary had been driven into a temporary state of insanity by the trauma of learning that his son had been sexually abused and kidnapped. They argued that Gary was not a danger to society and that he was only a danger to Jeff Doucette. They presented psychological reports showing that Gary had been in extreme emotional distress. On May 16, 1984, Gary Plauché agreed to a plea deal. He pleaded no contest to a reduced charge of manslaughter. In Louisiana, a manslaughter conviction could carry a maximum sentence of 21 years in prison. But Gary's defense attorneys pushed for a lenient sentence. They argued that Gary posed virtually no risk of committing another crime. They said that putting Gary in prison would not help anyone. Psychiatrist Dr. Edward Uzi testified that Gary had been so distraught that he could not tell right from wrong when he shot Doucette. Uzi said that Gary had developed delusions that he was the only person who could save his son and other children from a dangerous predator. Defense reports also discussed how Doucette had manipulated the Plauché family, taking advantage of the fact that Gary and June were separated at the time. On August 27, 1985, More than a year after the shooting, Gary Plauché appeared in court for sentencing. Judge Frank Sire presided over the case. Judge Sire acknowledged that the shooting was a tragedy, but he also said that both sides in the case were victims. Both families had suffered. Judge Sire ruled that sending Gary to prison would not serve any useful purpose. He said there was virtually no risk that Gary would commit another crime. Judge Sire sentenced Gary to 7 years at hard labour, but he suspended the entire sentence. This meant that Gary would not spend a single day in prison as long as he followed certain rules. Gary was placed on 5 years of probation. He was ordered to complete 300 hours of community service. He was also required to undergo treatment for substance abuse. Other than the time he spent in jail immediately after the shooting, Gary Plauché never went to prison for killing Jeff Doucette. The sentencing caused controversy. Some people believed that Gary had gotten off too easy. They argued that no one should be allowed to take the law into their own hands, no matter how terrible the crime. Roland Doucette, Jeff Doucette's brother, called the sentencing an outrage. He said that justice had not been done. Elia Doucette, Jeff's mother, said that the court was basically telling Gary to go out and kill again. But many other people supported Judge Sire's decision. They believed that Gary had acted out of love for his son, and that putting him in prison would only cause more suffering for the Plauché family. Gary Plauché completed his sentence. He fulfilled the 300 hours of community service, most of which he did at his local Catholic church, where he mowed the grass and performed other maintenance work. He stayed out of trouble and completed his probation by 1989. Gary went back to his job as a heavy equipment salesman in Baton Rouge. He tried to live a quiet life, but he never escaped the shadow of what he had done. For Jody Plauché, the aftermath of his father's actions was complicated. Jody was only 11 years old when his father shot and killed Jeff Doucette. At the time, Jody was still under the psychological influence of his abuser. Doucette had groomed him for over a year, treating him to movies, restaurants and shopping trips. Jody had genuinely believed that Doucette cared about him. When Jody learned that his father had killed Doucette, he was initially upset. He did not want Doucette dead. He just wanted the abuse to stop. Jody was angry at his father for taking such extreme action. It took time for Jody to come to terms with what happened. His mother, June, was more direct in her support of Gary. When June saw Gary in jail the night of the shooting, the first thing she said was, "You know you're going to hell for this, right?" Gary said he knew, but he did not care. Years later, June was asked about Gary's actions. She said, "Gary had an angel sitting on his shoulder. Are you kidding? Do you know how many kids weren't molested because Jeff Doucette is no longer on this earth?" June believed that Gary had done the right thing. Jody struggled emotionally during the summer of 1984. He felt sad and spent a lot of time feeling sorry for himself. But eventually, he stopped sulking and began to rebuild his life. He started dating in high school and went on to become a 4-sport letterman. He attended Louisiana State University, where he served on the executive board of an organization called Men Against Violence. After graduating, Jody worked as a sexual assault counselor at the Victim Services Center of Montgomery County in Pennsylvania. Jody dedicated his life to helping other victims of sexual abuse. He became a sexual abuse awareness activist and traveled around the country giving presentations and training sessions on how to reduce the risk of children being molested. In August 2019, Jody published a book called Why Gary Why? The Jody Plauché Story. In the book, Jody detailed his experience and explained how he eventually came to understand and accept what his father had done. Jody said that he now views his father as the greatest dad of all time. He said that while taking someone's life is not okay, when someone is as bad a person as Jeff Doucette was, it does not bother you too much in the long run. Jody also pointed out an important lesson he learned. He said that his father used to tell people that if anyone ever touched his kids, he would kill them. Jody knew his father was not joking. That is why Jody never told anyone about the abuse. He was afraid that if he spoke up, his father would kill Doucette, and that is exactly what happened. Jody now tells parents not to talk about sexual abuse in such extreme terms because it can make children afraid to come forward. Gary Plauché lived for 30 more years after shooting Jeff Doucette. He never expressed regret for his actions. In interviews conducted later in his life, Gary was asked directly if he regretted killing Doucette. His answer was always the same. He said, "Hell no." He said that if he had to do it all over again, he would do the same thing. Gary believed that he had saved his son and protected other children from a dangerous predator. Gary suffered a stroke in 2011 and spent the last few years of his life in a nursing home. On October 20th, 2014, Gary Plauché died at the age of 68. His family remembered him not as a vigilante, but as a kind, fun, and loving man who adored his family. The case of Gary Plauché remains one of the most famous examples of vigilante justice in American history. The video of Gary shooting Jeff Doucette has been viewed millions of times online and has been featured in numerous television programs and documentaries. The case continues to spark debate about justice, revenge, and the limits of the legal system. Some people view Gary as a hero who did what any parent would do to protect their child. Others see his actions as a dangerous example of someone taking the law into their own hands. The case raises difficult questions about whether the justice system is enough to address the worst crimes, especially crimes against children. For the Plauché family, the tragedy changed their lives forever, but they survived and moved forward, carrying the weight of that night at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport for the rest of their lives. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 2. Case number 2. Marianne Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in a small town called Sarstedt, which is near Hildesheim in Lower Saxony, West Germany. Her parents had moved to Sarstedt from East Prussia after the Second World War ended. Marianne grew up in a very difficult household. Her father had been a member of the Waffen-SS, which was the combat branch of the SS during Adolf Hitler's time. Her father struggled with heavy alcohol drinking and was often violent and unstable. The home environment was strict and conservative. When Marianne was only 9 years old, she was sexually assaulted by a local salesman. This traumatic experience, combined with the problems in her family, shaped the rest of her childhood. Eventually, her parents divorced. After the divorce, Marianne's mother formed a new relationship with another man. Marianne was kicked out of the family home. Marianne's teenage years were extremely difficult. At the age of 16 in 1966, she became pregnant for the first time. She was far too young and unprepared to raise a child, so she gave the baby up for adoption. 2 years later, when Marianne was 18 years old, she became pregnant again with her boyfriend. Shortly before this second child was born, Marianne was raped by another man. This was another horrible trauma in her young life. When the baby arrived, Marianne made the painful decision to place this second child up for adoption as well. In 1972, when Marianne was 22 years old, she became pregnant for a third time. She was dating the manager of a pub called Tipasa, where she worked. On November 14, 1972, Marianne gave birth to a baby girl. She named her daughter Anna. This time, Marianne decided she would raise the child herself. She was determined to be a good mother to Anna, even though she was a single parent with no help. Marianne worked full-time as a waitress and barmaid in the pub in Lübeck. Because she worked long hours and often late into the night, Marianne would bring Anna with her to the pub. Anna would sleep at the pub while Marianne worked behind the bar. Friends later said that Marianne treated Anna like a little adult and expected her daughter to take care of herself from a very young age. Marianne was aware that her lifestyle was not ideal for raising a child, and at times she even considered putting Anna up for adoption. But she decided against it. She loved Anna deeply, and Anna became the most important person in her life. Friends described Anna as a vibrant, happy, and open-minded child. The bond between mother and daughter was strong, even if their living situation was chaotic. On May 5, 1980, Marianne and Anna had an argument at home. Anna was 7 years old at the time. She was upset after the fight with her mother, and she decided to skip school that day. Instead of going to school, Anna planned to visit a friend who lived nearby. She left the house pretending to go to school, but she had other plans. As Anna walked through the neighborhood, she came across a man named Klaus Grabowski. Klaus Grabowski was 35 years old and worked as a butcher. He lived just a few doors away from Marianne and Anna. Anna had been to Grabowski's house before to play with his cats. He seemed like a friendly neighbor, and Anna had no reason to be afraid of him. But Klaus Grabowski was not a safe person. He was a convicted sex offender with a long and disturbing criminal history. Klaus Grabowski's first known crime happened in 1973. That year, he was arrested and charged with strangling a 6-year-old girl. He received a probation sentence for that crime, which meant he did not go to prison. Just a couple of years later, in 1975, Grabowski committed another crime. He was charged with sexually abusing two 9-year-old girls. This time, the authorities took the case more seriously. Grabowski was sent for a psychological evaluation. The evaluation said that Grabowski had an abnormal sexual addiction to children. The report stated that Grabowski was aware that what he was doing was wrong, but he was severely limited in his ability to stop himself because of his addiction. In 1976, Grabowski was sentenced to spend time in a psychological treatment facility. While he was there, he was given a choice. He could voluntarily undergo chemical castration, or he could stay in the facility for a much longer time. Chemical castration is a medical procedure where a person is given hormones that lower their testosterone levels. The idea is that this will reduce their sex drive and stop them from committing sexual crimes. Grabowski agreed to the castration. The procedure was performed, and shortly after, he was released from the facility. But there was no follow-up treatment or support to help him adjust to life after his release. He should have received ongoing psychological care, but he did not. 2 years later, in 1978, Grabowski went to see a urologist, which is a doctor who specializes in treating problems related to the urinary system and male reproductive organs. Grabowski told the doctor that he wanted hormone treatment to reverse the effects of the castration. He claimed he was experiencing physical side effects from the castration. He also said that he had a fiancée and they wanted to start a family together. The doctor agreed to give Grabowski the hormone treatment. On March 18th and April 25th, 1980, Grabowski was injected with a hormone called testosterone. He was also given tablets to take at home. The problem was that Grabowski had lied to the doctor. He told the doctor that he was receiving psychiatric treatment, but that was not true. The doctor never checked Grabowski's criminal record. He never followed up to see if Grabowski was actually getting the mental health support he claimed to be receiving. The doctor only treated Grabowski for the physical side effects of the castration. He did not consider the danger Grabowski might pose to children. By the time of Anna's murder, Grabowski's testosterone levels had returned to the same level they were before his castration. He was once again a danger to children. On May 5th, 1980, when Anna left her house to skip school, she ended up at Klaus Grabowski's apartment. She had been there before to play with his cats, so she felt comfortable going inside. But this time, Grabowski did not let her leave. He held Anna captive in his home for several hours. During that time, he abused her. Whether he sexually assaulted her remains unclear, as different sources give different information. What is certain is that Grabowski eventually strangled Anna to death with a pair of pantyhose that belonged to his fiancée. After killing her, Grabowski placed Anna's small body inside a cardboard box. He carried the box to the bank of a nearby canal and tried to hide it there. He planned to come back later to bury the body, but Grabowski's fiancée became suspicious. She noticed that something was wrong and she contacted the police. The police went to Grabowski's favourite pub in Lübeck that same evening and arrested him. At first, Grabowski denied everything, but eventually he confessed to killing Anna. However, he denied sexually abusing her. During police questioning, Grabowski told a shocking and disturbing story. He claimed that Anna had tried to extort money from him. He said that Anna threatened to tell her mother that Grabowski had touched her inappropriately unless he gave her money. According to Grabowski, he was afraid of going back to prison, so he killed Anna to keep her quiet. He tried to blame the murder on the 7-year-old child. He painted Anna as someone who was trying to blackmail him. The police did not believe his story. Neither did anyone else who heard it. When Marianne Bachmeier learned that her daughter was dead, she was completely destroyed. The grief of losing a child is something that most people cannot imagine. For Marianne, the pain was unbearable. She had already lived through so much trauma in her own life. Now, the one person she loved most in the world had been taken from her in the most horrible way. Marianne's world fell apart. She attended Anna's funeral and tried to process what had happened. But she could not find peace. She was angry, she was heartbroken, and she felt that the justice system had failed to protect her daughter. Klaus Grabowski had a long history of hurting children, yet he had been allowed to walk free. He had been given chance after chance, and each time he hurt another child. Now Anna was dead because the system had not stopped him. Klaus Grabowski's trial for the murder of Anna Bachmeier began on March 4th, 1981, at the District Court of Lübeck. The trial was held in room 157 of the courthouse. Marianne attended the trial every day. She sat in the courtroom and listened as the lawyers presented their case. Grabowski had already confessed to killing Anna, so there was no question about whether he had committed the crime. The question was, what punishment he would receive. During the first 2 days of the trial, Grabowski's defense attorneys presented their argument. They claimed that Grabowski had acted because of a hormonal imbalance. They said that the hormone therapy he received after his castration had made him emotionally unstable and violent. They argued that Grabowski had been in a state of serious emotional disorder when he killed Anna, and that he should not be held fully accountable for his actions because of this condition. The defense attorneys also repeated Grabowski's claim that Anna had tried to seduce him and blackmail him. They suggested that Anna, a 7-year-old child, was somehow responsible for what had happened to her. They argued that Grabowski had only killed Anna because she threatened to tell her mother about inappropriate contact, and he was afraid of going back to prison. Marianne sat in the courtroom and listened to these arguments. She was furious. The defense was trying to blame her dead daughter for her own murder. They were making Anna out to be a liar and a manipulator. Marianne could not stand to hear these lies being told about Anna. On the second day of the trial, the doctor who had given Grabowski the hormone treatment was called to testify. Dr. Volker vom Ender explained that Grabowski had told him he had been castrated because he was merely an exhibitionist. Grabowski had not told the doctor about his convictions for sexually abusing children. The doctor admitted that he should have checked Grabowski's criminal record before agreeing to give him the hormone treatment, but he had not done so. He had simply treated Grabowski for the physical side effects of castration, without considering the danger Grabowski posed to others. Marianne and Anna's father later tried to sue the doctor for negligence, but they were not successful. They could not find an expert witness who would testify that the doctor had done anything wrong. On the evening of March 5, 1981, after the second day of the trial, Marianne made a decision. She could not sit in that courtroom for one more day and listen to Klaus Grabowski and his lawyers spread lies about Anna. She decided that she would take justice into her own hands. According to friends who spoke about the case years later, Marianne had been planning this moment for some time. One friend said that Marianne had practiced shooting in the basement of the pub where she worked. She had prepared herself for what she was about to do. On the morning of March 6, 1981, the third day of Klaus Grabowski's trial, Marianne Bachmeier arrived at the Lübeck District Court. She was carrying a purse, and inside that purse was a Beretta 70 pistol. The pistol was a small .22 caliber handgun. She had loaded it with ammunition before leaving home. Marianne somehow managed to get through the courthouse security with the gun hidden in her purse. At around 10 o'clock in the morning, the courtroom was full of people. Klaus Grabowski was sitting at the front of the room with his back to the audience. The judge, lawyers and other court officials were all present. News cameras were also there because the case had attracted a lot of media attention. Marianne Bachmeier stood up from her seat. She reached into her purse and pulled out the Beretta 70 pistol. She aimed the gun at Klaus Grabowski's back. Then she fired. She pulled the trigger again and again. According to most reports, Marianne fired 7 or 8 shots in total. Some sources say she fired 7 shots, while others say she fired 8. What is certain is that 6 of the bullets hit Klaus Grabowski. The shots struck him in the back near his spine. Grabowski fell to the floor of the courtroom. Blood poured from his wounds. He was killed almost instantly. The entire courtroom erupted in chaos. People screamed and ducked for cover. Security guards and police officers rushed toward Marianne. She lowered the gun and did not resist. She allowed the officers to take the gun from her hand and place her under arrest. She did not try to run. She did not try to fire any more shots. She simply stood there, calm and composed. Witnesses in the courtroom later reported that Marianne made several statements immediately after the shooting. According to some accounts, she said, "I wanted to kill him. I wanted to shoot him in the face, but I shot him in the back. I hope he is dead." Other witnesses reported that she called Grabowski a pig. When she was taken into custody, Marianne wrote an official statement. In that statement, she wrote, "I did it for you, Anna." She drew 7 small hearts next to those words, 1 heart for each year of Anna's life. Klaus Grabowski was rushed to a hospital, but there was nothing the doctors could do. Some reports say he died on the courtroom floor. Other reports say he died on the way to the hospital. Either way, Klaus Grabowski was dead within minutes of being shot. He was 35 years old. Marianne Bachmeier was immediately arrested and taken to jail. She was initially charged with second-degree murder. The charge carried a potential sentence of life in prison, but as news of what Marianne had done spread across West Germany, something unexpected happened. The public reacted with an enormous outpouring of support for Marianne. Thousands of people sent letters to Marianne in jail. They sent her flowers, gifts, and money. Many people said they understood why she had done what she did. They said that if they were in her position, they would have done the same thing. Supporters gathered outside the courthouse and chanted, "Marianne, we understand you." A citizens group called the Community of Those Interested in Justice and Equality collected around $50,000 for Marianne's legal defense within the first week after the shooting. More donations poured in from across the country. Marianne's story became front-page news in West Germany and around the world. The magazine Stern paid Marianne approximately 100,000 Deutsche Marks for the exclusive rights to publish her life story. Marianne used that money to pay for her legal defense. But not everyone supported Marianne. Some people believed that what she had done was wrong, no matter how terrible Grabowski's crime had been. They argued that no one should be allowed to take the law into their own hands. They said that if Marianne was allowed to kill Grabowski without serious punishment, it would set a dangerous example. It would suggest that vigilante justice was acceptable, and that would undermine the entire legal system. Klaus Grabowski's family was outraged by the public support for Marianne. Grabowski's mother and brother spoke to the press and said that Marianne should be punished to the full extent of the law. They said that Grabowski, despite his crimes, was still a human being who deserved a fair trial. They said that Marianne had robbed him of that right. Marianne Bachmeier's trial began on November 2nd, 1982, more than a year and a half after the shooting. The trial lasted for 28 days. It was one of the most closely watched trials in West German history. Television crews from around the world came to Lübeck to cover the proceedings. The case became a national debate about justice, grief, and whether a mother's pain could ever justify taking a life. During the trial, prosecutors initially charged Marianne with premeditated murder. Premeditated murder meant that Marianne had planned the killing in advance, and it carried a potential sentence of life in prison. But as the evidence was presented, the prosecution changed the charge. They dropped the murder charge and instead charged Marianne with manslaughter. Manslaughter is a less serious charge that applies when someone kills another person but did not plan it in advance or acted in the heat of passion. The prosecution recommended an 8-year prison sentence. Marianne's defense attorneys argued that she had not planned to kill Grabowski. They said that Marianne had brought the gun to the courtroom, but she had not decided to use it until she heard Grabowski and his lawyers spreading lies about Anna. They said that when Marianne heard those lies, she entered a temporary state of emotional insanity. She was so overwhelmed by grief and rage that she could not think clearly. The defense attorneys presented reports from psychologists who had examined Marianne. The psychologists testified that Marianne had experienced severe trauma throughout her life. She had been sexually assaulted as a child. She had been raped as a young adult. She had given up 2 children for adoption. And now, her beloved daughter Anna had been murdered by a man who should never have been free. The psychologist said that all of this trauma had made Marianne emotionally unstable. They said that when she heard Grabowski blaming Anna for her own death, something inside Marianne broke. She acted out of pure emotion, not rational thought. The trial also focused heavily on Marianne's troubled background. The magazine Stern had already published detailed articles about Marianne's life, and those details were repeated during the trial. The public learned about Marianne's abusive childhood, her alcoholic father, her experiences with sexual violence, and her struggles as a single mother. Some people felt sympathy for Marianne because of all she had been through. Others felt that her troubled past did not excuse what she had done. The case raised difficult questions. Was Marianne a grieving mother who had been pushed beyond her breaking point, or was she a cold-blooded killer who had committed premeditated murder? Could the justice system ever truly understand the pain of a mother who had lost her child in such a horrible way? And if Marianne was allowed to kill Grabowski without spending significant time in prison, would that encourage other people to take the law into their own hands? On March 2nd, 1983, 4 months after her trial began, Marianne Bachmeier was found guilty. The court convicted her of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a firearm. The court accepted the argument that Marianne had not fully planned the murder in advance, but they also said that her actions were wrong and could not be excused. Judge Frank Sayer, who presided over the case, made it clear that private revenge could not replace the judicial process, no matter how sympathetic the circumstances. Marianne was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Public reaction to the sentence was deeply divided. A poll conducted at the time showed that 28% of Germans thought the sentence was fair, 27% thought the sentence was too harsh, and 25% thought the sentence was too lenient. The case had split the nation right down the middle. Marianne served her sentence without incident. She was a model prisoner and caused no trouble. In June 1985, after serving 3 years of her 6-year sentence, Marianne was released on parole. She had served exactly half of her sentence. Her parole conditions lasted for 2 years and 10 months. During that time, Marianne had to follow certain rules and check in regularly with authorities. She completed her parole without any problems. After her release from prison, Marianne tried to rebuild her life. In late 1985, she married a German school teacher. The couple wanted to start fresh, somewhere far away from Germany, where Marianne could escape the constant media attention. In 1988, Marianne and her husband moved to Lagos, Nigeria, where her husband had accepted a job teaching at a German school. They lived in a German community there. Marianne hoped that moving to another continent would give her the peace and privacy she desperately needed. But the marriage did not last. In 1990, Marianne and her husband divorced. After the divorce, Marianne moved to Palermo, Sicily, in Italy. She found work as an aide in a hospice, caring for people who were dying. This job seemed to give Marianne some sense of purpose. She spent several years living quietly in Sicily, far from the spotlight. But in the mid-1990s, Marianne became ill. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive and deadly forms of cancer. Marianne knew she did not have much time left. She decided to return to Germany to die in the place where Anna was buried. In 1994, 13 years after the shooting, Marianne gave an interview to a German radio station called Deutschlandfunk. She spoke openly about what she had done. She said that she had shot Klaus Grabowski after careful consideration. She said she did it to enforce justice and to prevent Grabowski from spreading more lies about Anna during the trial. The same year, Marianne published her autobiography. The book was released by a publishing company called Schneekluth Verlag. In 1995, Marianne appeared on a German television talk show. During the interview, she admitted once again that she had deliberately killed Grabowski. She said she had no regrets about what she had done. She believed that Grabowski deserved to die for what he had done to Anna. Before Marianne died, she asked a reporter named Lukas Maria Burmer from the German broadcaster Norddeutscher Rundfunk to film the last stages of her life. She wanted her final days to be documented. On September 17, 1996, Marianne Bachmeier died in a hospital in Lübeck. She was 46 years old. She was buried next to her daughter Anna in Bergtor Cemetery in Lübeck. Their graves sit side by side. On Marianne's gravestone, there is an inscription that reads, "Here rests in God, Marianne Bachmeier." The shared burial site became a symbol of the eternal bond between mother and daughter, reunited in death after years of separation. The case of Marianne Bachmeier remains one of the most famous and controversial examples of vigilante justice in modern European history. The shooting was described by German broadcaster NDR as the most attention-grabbing case of self-administered justice in post-war German history. The case sparked intense debates that continue to this day. Some people view Marianne as a hero, a mother who did what the justice system could not do. They argue that Klaus Grabowski was a monster who had been given multiple chances by the legal system and had used those chances to hurt more children. They believe that Marianne delivered the justice that Grabowski deserved. Others view Marianne as a dangerous vigilante who took the law into her own hands and set a terrible precedent. They argue that no matter how terrible Grabowski's crimes were, he had a right to a fair trial. They believe that allowing people to commit murder, even in the name of justice, undermines the rule of law and leads to chaos. The case also raised important questions about the treatment of sex offenders and the effectiveness of chemical castration. Klaus Grabowski had undergone castration specifically to prevent him from hurting more children, but he had then been allowed to reverse that procedure through hormone therapy. The doctor who provided the hormone therapy never checked Grabowski's criminal history. He never verified that Grabowski was receiving the psychological support he claimed to be getting. If proper oversight had been in place, Anna Bachmeier might still be alive today. The case led to discussions in Germany about how to better monitor sex offenders and prevent them from re-offending. Over the years, Marianne Bachmeier's story has been told and retold many times. In 1984, just a few years after the shooting, 2 German documentary films were released about the case. One was called No Time for Tears, the Bachmeier case, and the other was called Anna's Mother. Both films portrayed Marianne's difficult life as a single mother and the events leading up to the shooting. In the early 1980s, a theatre group in Canada called the Anna Collective created a play about Marianne. The play was called This Is For You, Anna, and it premiered in 1984. In 1996, just before Marianne died, a documentary called The Slow Death of Marianne Bachmeier was filmed. It showed the final months of her life as she battled cancer. Marianne Bachmeier's story continues to circulate on the internet. Videos and articles about the case are shared widely, often with the label Revenge Mom. The case is frequently discussed in forums and comment sections, where people debate whether Marianne was right or wrong to do what she did. The story resonates with people because it touches on universal themes of love, loss, justice, and revenge. It forces people to confront difficult questions about what they would do if they were in Marianne's position. Would they trust the legal system to deliver justice? Or would they take matters into their own hands? There are no easy answers to these questions, and that is why the case of Marianne Bachmeier remains so compelling more than 40 years after it happened. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 3. Case number 3, Elena Starr Nesler, known as Ellie, was born on August 2nd, 1952. She grew up in the hill country around Jamestown, California, which is a small town in Tuolumne County. Jamestown was established in 1848 during the California Gold Rush, when thousands of people came to California hoping to find gold and make their fortunes. Over the years, an estimated $30 million worth of gold and ore came out of the mines in and around Jamestown. By the time Ellie was growing up there in the 1950s and 1960s, the gold rush days were long over, but Jamestown was still a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else. Ellie was the oldest of 3 daughters. Her father worked as a coal miner, and the family did not have much money. Times were tough, and everyone in the family had to work hard just to get by. Ellie's mother, Marie, came from a family of hard-working people. Marie was described as being as protective as a mother bear when it came to her children, but she also expected her daughters to be tough and able to take care of themselves. From a young age, Ellie learned that she had to rely on herself and pull her own weight. As a teenager, Ellie took any job she could find to help bring in money for the family. She drove tractors for local cattle ranchers, she dug ditches, she installed irrigation pipes, she worked on cars, she did whatever needed to be done. Ellie learned to be tough and independent. She learned that life was hard and that sometimes you had to fight for yourself and your family. Ellie married young and had her first marriage end in divorce. Later, she met a man named Bill Nesler. Bill was a gold miner like Ellie's father, and he was also a pilot who flew crop-dusting planes. Bill and Ellie got married. In 1982, they had a son. They named him William, but everyone called him Willie. Bill knew all the stories and legends of the gold country. He had heard about old-timers striking it rich with nothing more than a pan and determination. Bill knew that the land around Jamestown had been mined out years ago, and there was very little gold left there. So Bill decided to move the family to Liberia, a country in West Africa. At the time, there was a new gold rush taking place in Liberia, and people from all over the world were going there to try to find gold and make money. While the family was living in Liberia, Ellie gave birth to a daughter named Becky, but shortly after Becky was born, a civil war broke out in Liberia. The situation became dangerous. Ellie decided to take Willie and Becky and return to California for their safety. Bill stayed behind in Liberia to continue working. Ellie settled back in Jamestown with her 2 young children. She was now a single mother trying to raise 2 kids on her own. Money was tight. Ellie got by on welfare checks and by chopping wood to sell. It was a hard life, but Ellie was determined to take care of her children. In the summer of 1988, when Willie was about 6 or 7 years old, Ellie sent him to a Christian summer camp. The camp was a place where children could go to play games, do activities, and learn about religion. It seemed like a safe and fun place for Willie to spend some time. At the camp, there was a man named Daniel Mark Driver, who worked as a dishwasher. Driver was 35 years old at the time. He seemed friendly and helpful with the children, but Daniel Driver was not a safe person. He had a dark history that most people at the camp did not know about. In 1984, several years before he worked at the camp where Willie went, Daniel Driver had been arrested and charged with committing lewd and sexual acts with multiple boys in the San Jose area. The charges were serious. Driver pleaded guilty to the crimes. He was facing prison time. But before Driver was sentenced, members of the church he attended wrote letters to the judge. In these letters, the church members vouched for Driver's character. They said he was a good person. They asked the judge to be lenient with him. The judge read all the letters and decided to give Driver probation instead of sending him to prison. Probation meant that Driver would not have to go to jail as long as he followed certain rules and stayed out of trouble. This was a huge mistake. Driver was a dangerous predator and he should have been locked up to protect children. Instead, he was allowed to walk free. After receiving probation, Driver moved to an area near his mother's home and began dating a woman who had a young son. The woman started to notice that Driver acted strangely around her son and other young boys. She asked her son if Driver had ever touched him inappropriately, and her son said no. But a few months later, the woman walked into her house and caught Driver trying to touch her son inappropriately. She immediately reported Driver to the police, but by the time the authorities tried to find Driver, he had disappeared. Driver went on the run. He fled the area and went into hiding. For several years, Driver managed to avoid being caught. During this time, he ended up working at the Christian summer camp in Tuolumne County, where Willie Nesler attended. At the camp in the summer of 1988, Driver targeted Willie and at least 4 other boys. Driver was skilled at manipulating children and gaining their trust. He found ways to get the boys alone. Then, he sexually abused them. According to later court documents, Driver raped Willie. The abuse was traumatic and terrifying for the young boy. Driver threatened Willie, telling him that if he ever told anyone what had happened, Driver would kill Willie, his sister Becky, and his mother Ellie. Willie was only 6 or 7 years old. He was terrified. He believed Driver's threats, so he stayed silent and did not tell anyone what had happened. Several months after the abuse at the camp, Willie's behaviour began to change. His family noticed that something was wrong. Willie became different. He seemed anxious and scared. He had nightmares. He became what people described as like Jekyll and Hyde, meaning his personality would shift dramatically. Sometimes he seemed like his normal self, and other times he seemed angry and troubled. He asked his mother questions about suicide, which was very alarming for a child his age. Once, Ellie found Willie with a gun. Winnie became what is called hypervigilant, meaning he was constantly on alert and worried. He expected that Driver would come and kidnap him and kill him, just like Driver had threatened. Eventually, Willie told his mother what had happened at the camp. Annie was horrified and heartbroken. She immediately reported everything to the police. The police ran a background check on Daniel Driver and discovered his previous convictions for child molestation. They also learned that Driver had been on the run and that there was a warrant out for his arrest. The police began investigating. They discovered that Driver had abused at least 4 other boys at the camp in addition to Willie. In May 1989, a criminal complaint was filed against Driver. The complaint charged him with 7 counts of child molestation involving Willie and 3 other boys, who ranged in age from 6 to 8 years old. But there was a problem. Driver had disappeared again. The police could not find him. Driver had fled and was hiding somewhere, and nobody knew where he was. For nearly 4 years, Driver remained on the run. During those 4 years, Willie continued to suffer. The trauma of what Driver had done to him affected every part of his life. He struggled in school. He had trouble sleeping. He lived in constant fear that Driver would find him and carry out his threats to kill him and his family. Ellie watched helplessly as her son struggled. She wanted justice. She wanted Driver to be caught and punished for what he had done to Willie and the other boys. But year after year passed, and Driver remained free. Finally, in late 1992 or early 1993, Driver was caught. He was arrested in Palo Alto, California for theft. When the police ran his information, they discovered the outstanding warrants for his arrest on the child molestation charges in Tuolumne County. Driver was brought back to Tuolumne County to face trial. He was charged with multiple counts of child molestation. The case was serious, and if convicted, Driver faced many years in prison. Driver's preliminary hearing was scheduled to take place at the Jamestown Justice Court on April 2, 1993. A preliminary hearing is a court proceeding where a judge decides if there is enough evidence for the case to go to trial. As part of this hearing, the victims would need to testify about what Driver had done to them. This meant that Willie, who was now 11 years old, would have to stand up in court and tell everyone about the terrible things that had happened to him. He would have to face Driver in person and relive the trauma all over again. Ellie was very upset about the idea of Willie having to testify in front of Driver. She asked the court if Willie's testimony could be videotaped instead, so that Willie would not have to be in the same room as Driver. The court said that was not possible. Ellie then asked if the hearing could at least be closed to the public, so that Willie would not have to testify in front of a room full of strangers. The court denied this request as well. The hearing would be open to the public, and Willie would have to testify in person, with Driver sitting right there in the courtroom. On the morning of April 2nd, 1993, Willie woke up feeling sick. He was terrified about having to face Driver. He began vomiting and could not stop. Even after he and Ellie arrived at the courthouse, Willie continued to throw up. He was holding a plastic garbage bag and vomiting into it. Ellie was beside him, trying to comfort him and encourage him. She told him he was brave and that everything would be okay. But inside, Ellie was furious and heartbroken. She could see how much pain and fear her son was in, and it was all because of Daniel Driver. Ellie's sister, Jeanette Martinez, was at the courthouse with them that day. Jeanette had brought her purse, and inside her purse was a .25 caliber pistol. Jeanette carried the gun for personal protection. While they were at the courthouse, Driver was brought in by sheriff's deputies. Driver was wearing an orange jail outfit, handcuffs, and a belly chain. As Driver was being led through the courthouse toward the courtroom, he passed right by Willie. Willie's face was in the plastic bag because he was vomiting. He looked up for just a second, and Driver caught sight of him. Witnesses said that Driver looked at Willie and smirked. It was a big, mean grin, like Driver was mocking the boy. Ellie saw this. She saw the man who had raped her son smirking at him, while Willie was sick with fear. Something inside Ellie snapped. She became enraged. Her eyes were described as crackling, and her face was flushed. She lunged toward Driver, trying to attack him, but family members grabbed her and held her back. Driver was led into the courtroom. Ellie asked Jeanette if she had any Tums, which is an antacid medicine that helps with upset stomachs. She wanted to give some to Willie to help him feel better. Jeanette opened her purse to check if she had any Tums. When she opened the purse, Ellie saw the gun inside. Less than 5 minutes later, during a break in the hearing, Ellie quietly took the gun from her sister's purse without Jeanette knowing. The courtroom was packed with people. The judge was not present during the break. Driver was sitting shackled near his defense attorney at a table. His back was turned toward the audience. Ellie walked up behind Driver's defense attorney. She positioned herself just 2 or 3 feet away from Driver. Then she pulled out the .25 caliber pistol. She aimed the gun at the left side of Driver's head and neck. She fired rapidly. She pulled the trigger 5 times. All 5 shots hit Driver. The bullets struck him in the head and neck. According to some reports, Ellie fired a 6th shot that missed and hit the wall. Driver immediately collapsed. He fell to the floor of the courtroom. Blood poured from his wounds. He died almost instantly, right there on the courtroom floor. The courtroom erupted in chaos. People screamed. Ellie lowered the gun. She did not try to run. She did not resist. Sheriff's deputies immediately grabbed her and took the gun from her hand. She was arrested on the spot. According to witnesses, Ellie said, "I may not be God, but I tell you what, I'm the closest damn thing to it." She later told officials, "I wanted to kill him. I wanted to shoot him in the face, but I shot him in the back. I hope he's dead." Some witnesses reported that she called Driver a pig. Driver was taken to a hospital, but there was nothing doctors could do. He was pronounced dead. He was 35 years old. Ellie was charged with second-degree murder. The charge carried a potential sentence of life in prison. She was held in jail and her bail was set at $500,000. But something unexpected happened in the days and weeks after the shooting. Instead of being condemned, Ellie became a hero to many people. The story of what she had done spread across the entire United States. News crews from around the country and even from other countries came to Jamestown to report on the case. The case sparked a national debate about vigilantism, justice, and whether a parent could ever be justified in taking the law into their own hands. In Jamestown and the surrounding communities, public support for Ellie was overwhelming. People said they understood why she had done what she did. They said that if they were in her position, they might have done the same thing. 2 local banks set up defence funds for Ellie. Shops and bars put out big glass jars to collect cash donations. People sent cheques and money orders from all over the country. Flowers, gifts and letters of support poured into the jail where Ellie was being held. T-shirts were printed that said, "Nice shooting, Ellie." Bumper stickers appeared with the same message. Community members organised spaghetti dinners and other fundraisers to help pay for Ellie's legal defence. Within the first week after the shooting, a citizens group collected around $50,000 for her defence fund. The donations kept coming. People called Ellie a folk hero. They called her the heroine of the Motherlode. They said she had done what the justice system had failed to do. They pointed out that Driver had been given probation years earlier, despite pleading guilty to molesting children. If he had been sent to prison back then, Willie and the other boys would never have been hurt. After about a week, a bail bondsman posted Ellie's $500,000 bail, and she was released from jail while she awaited trial. She thanked her supporters but otherwise kept quiet and stayed out of sight. Ellie hired J. Tony Serra, a renowned and colourful defence attorney from San Francisco. Serra was known for taking on difficult and controversial cases. He began preparing Ellie's defence, but as the weeks went by, some information came out that changed how some people viewed Ellie. Tests showed that Ellie had been under the influence of methamphetamine when she shot Driver. Methamphetamine is a powerful and illegal drug that affects the brain and can cause people to act erratically. The finding that Ellie had been high on meth at the time of the shooting caused the sympathetic portrait of her to begin to fade for some people. It also came to light that Ellie had a criminal record. When she was 18 years old, she had been convicted of auto theft. She had served several months in a California Youth Authority facility. Some people began to question whether Ellie was really the hero they had thought she was, or whether she was just a troubled woman with a drug problem who had committed murder. Ellie's trial began in late 1993. Her defense attorney, J. Tony Serra, raised a temporary insanity defense. He argued that Ellie had been driven to a temporarily psychotic state by the trauma of what had happened to her son and by the stress of seeing Willie have to face his abuser in court. Serra argued that when Ellie saw Driver smirking at Willie, she had a mental breakdown and could not control her actions. The prosecution argued that Ellie had committed premeditated murder. They said she had taken the gun from her sister's purse and had deliberately shot Driver. They said her actions were calculated and intentional, not the result of temporary insanity. The trial was closely watched by people across the country. Television news programs covered it extensively. It became a national flashpoint on the issue of vigilantism. Was Ellie a grieving mother who had been pushed beyond her breaking point, or was she a cold-blooded killer who had taken the law into her own hands? During the trial, Ellie appeared on television programs, including The Maury Povich Show. During one of these appearances, she revealed a secret that she had kept from everyone, including her own sisters. She said that she had been molested as a child. This revelation added another layer to her story and helped some people understand why she had reacted so violently when she saw Driver smirking at her son. On January 7, 1994, after the trial concluded, Ellie was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter is a less serious charge than murder. It applies when someone kills another person in the heat of passion or during a sudden quarrel without premeditation. The jury found that Ellie had not planned to kill Driver in advance, but that she had acted in a moment of extreme emotion. Judge Douglas Marsh sentenced Ellie to 10 years in prison. He denied her request for probation and rejected defense pleas for leniency. Ellie accepted the sentence. She told the public that the judge had been correct in imposing it and that she needed to be held accountable for her actions. While Ellie was awaiting trial in 1994, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. This was another tragedy in her already difficult life. She would have to fight cancer while also fighting for her freedom. Ellie served her sentence at the California Correctional Institution near Jamestown. While she was in prison, her children were raised by family members. Willie was raised by an aunt. The years Ellie spent in prison were hard for the whole family, but in 1997, Ellie's case took an unexpected turn. The California Supreme Court overturned her conviction based on jury misconduct. During Ellie's trial, one of the jurors, a woman named Linda Boyes, had shared information with the other jurors that she had learned outside of the courtroom. Boyes had been at a bar and had overheard a conversation about Ellie. In this conversation, someone had said that Ellie was a chronic drug user, a poor parent, and that she had manipulated her son. Boyer then repeated this information to the other jurors during their deliberations. This was serious misconduct, because jurors are only supposed to consider evidence that is presented in court, not rumours or gossip they hear from other sources. The Supreme Court ruled that this misconduct had created a substantial likelihood of bias against Ellie's insanity defence. The court ordered a new trial. Rather than go through another trial, Ellie accepted a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and withdrew her insanity plea. As part of the agreement, she had to make a statement of remorse, apologising to Driver's family, the judges, and the public. In exchange for the plea, her sentence was reduced to time served. On October 2nd, 1997, Ellie was released from prison. She had served nearly 4 years in custody since her arrest in 1993. She was placed on 3 years of supervised parole. As part of her parole conditions, she had to meet regularly with a parole officer and submit to random drug and alcohol testing. After her release, Ellie tried to rebuild her life. She was reunited with Willie and Becky. She had signed a $110,000 contract with television producers in 1994 to sell her life story. In 1999, a made-for-television movie called Judgment Day, The Ellie Nessler Story, aired on television. The movie starred Christine Lahti as Ellie. The movie brought Ellie more fame and attention, but friends said that the money and fame did not bring Ellie happiness or stability. One friend said that Ellie went through all the money quickly and ended up homeless. Life after prison was not easy for Ellie. She struggled to escape the label of being Ellie Nessler, the vigilante. She could never just be a normal person living a normal life. Everyone knew who she was and what she had done. Ellie's struggles with drugs continued. In 2002, Ellie was arrested again. She was convicted of attempting to purchase 10,000 pseudoephedrine tablets. Pseudoephedrine is a substance used to make methamphetamine. Ellie was charged with selling and possessing methamphetamine. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. When she was sentenced, Ellie said she was innocent and told reporters she could not get a fair trial in Tuolumne County. But the conviction stood. Ellie was sent back to prison. While Ellie was serving her second prison sentence, more tragedy struck her family. In 2005, Willie, who was now an adult, was involved in a violent incident. Willie had allowed a man named David Davis to live on the family property in exchange for help with work. But the two men got into a dispute over tools. On the day Willie was released early from a 30-day jail sentence for an earlier assault on Davis, Willie went to the property. Within 1 hour of being released, Willie stomped David Davis to death. Willie was arrested, charged with murder, and convicted. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. This was devastating for Ellie. The son she had tried so hard to protect was now serving a life sentence for murder. Ellie was released from prison in 2006 after serving about 4 years of her 6-year sentence. She was battling breast cancer, which had spread despite treatment. By late 2008, Ellie's health was declining rapidly. Her cancer had become terminal. On December 26, 2008, Ellie Nessler died at the UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento. She was 56 years old. She was survived by her daughter Becky and her son Willie, who was still in prison. Willie requested temporary leave from prison to attend his mother's funeral. He had been in communication with his mother and with family members as her health declined. He knew she was very ill. Prison officials reviewed his request. Ellie's funeral was held in Angels Camp in Calaveras County. A family friend who was a pastor performed the service. The friend said that while Ellie had made many mistakes in her life, at heart she was a good person who loved her children and loved God. Ellie was buried in the Altaville Protestant Cemetery in Angels Camp. The case of Ellie Nessler remains one of the most controversial and widely discussed examples of vigilante justice in American history. The Associated Press wrote that the incident sparked a national debate about vigilantism. The case raised difficult questions about justice, revenge, and the role of the legal system. Some people continue to view Ellie as a hero who did what any loving parent would do when faced with their child's abuser walking free. They argue that the justice system failed Willie and the other boys by giving Driver probation instead of prison time years earlier. They say that if Driver had been properly punished the first time, he never would have had the chance to hurt Willie. They believe Ellie delivered the justice that Driver deserved. Others view Ellie's actions as dangerous vigilantism that undermined the rule of law. They argue that no matter how terrible Driver's crimes were, he had a right to a trial. They say that allowing people to commit murder, even in the name of protecting their children, sets a terrible precedent. If everyone who felt the justice system had failed them decided to take the law into their own hands, society would descend into chaos. The case also raised questions about how the justice system handles child molestation cases. Why was Driver given probation instead of prison time when he pleaded guilty to molesting children? Why did it take nearly 4 years to catch Driver after he fled? Could Willie and the other boys have been spared if the system had worked properly? The story of Ellie Nessler is a tragedy on multiple levels. It is the tragedy of children being abused by a predator who should have been stopped. It is the tragedy of a mother who felt so powerless and enraged that she took a gun into a courtroom and killed a man. It is the tragedy of a woman who struggled with addiction and could never escape the consequences of one violent act. And it is the tragedy of a family torn apart by violence, trauma, and loss. More than 30 years after that day in the Jamestown courthouse, people still debate whether Ellie Nessler was right or wrong, whether she was a hero or a murderer, whether justice was served or denied. There are no easy answers, and that is why the case continues to fascinate and trouble people to this day. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 4. Case number 4. Maria del Carmen Garcia lived in Benejusar, a small town in the Alicante province of Spain. Benejusar is located about 30 miles from the city of Alicante, on Spain's Costa Blanca. It is a quiet town where families know their neighbours and children play in the streets. Maria was a mother raising her daughter, Veronica, in this close-knit community. Like many mothers, Maria wanted nothing more than to keep her daughter safe and give her a good life. But in October 1998, something happened that would change their lives forever, and eventually lead Maria to commit an act that would shock the entire nation of Spain. In 1998, Veronica was 13 years old. She was a young teenager living in Benejusar with her mother. In their neighbourhood lived a man named Antonio Cosme. He was their neighbour, someone they saw regularly in the small town. Cosme was a familiar figure in the community. He knew the family and they knew him. This familiarity is what made what happened next so devastating. In October 1998, Antonio Cosme used his position as a trusted neighbour to get close to Veronica. He lured her into a situation where she was vulnerable and alone. Then he attacked her. Cosme raped Veronica at knife point. He used a knife to threaten the 13-year-old girl and force her to do what he wanted. The assault was brutal and terrifying. Veronica was just a child, and this horrible crime traumatised her in ways that would affect her for the rest of her life. When Veronica told her mother what had happened, Maria was devastated and enraged. Her daughter, her baby, had been violently attacked by someone they knew, someone who lived in their own neighbourhood. Maria immediately went to the authorities and reported the crime. She wanted justice. She wanted Antonio Cosme to be arrested and punished for what he had done to her daughter. But what followed was a long and difficult process that would test Maria's strength and patience. The case against Antonio Cosme split the town of Benejusar right down the middle. Some residents believed Veronica and supported the Garcia family. They were horrified by what had happened and wanted to see Cosme held accountable. But other residents refused to believe that Cosme could have done such a thing. They rubbished Veronica's account, meaning they dismissed it and said it was not true. They were in denial about the horrific crime that had been committed by someone they knew as a familiar figure in their town. This reaction from some members of the community made everything even harder for Veronica and Maria. Not only did they have to deal with the trauma of the rape itself, but they also had to face neighbours and community members who did not believe them or who took Cosme's side. The legal process moved slowly. In Spain, as in many countries, criminal cases can take a long time to work their way through the court system. For Maria and Veronica, every day that passed without justice was another day of suffering. Veronica had to live with the memory of what Cosme had done to her. She had to see him around town, knowing that he had not yet been punished. The trial itself was another ordeal. When Cosme finally went to trial, there were no separation screens in the courtroom. This meant that Veronica had to face her attacker directly. She had to sit in the same room with the man who had raped her. Cosme was able to see her, and his lawyers were able to question her aggressively. This is a common problem in sexual assault cases. Victims often have to relive their trauma in court, and they have to face their attackers while doing so. For a 13-year-old girl, this experience was incredibly difficult and frightening. During the trial, Cosme's behaviour was disturbing. He taunted Veronica in open court. He showed no remorse for what he had done. His lawyers asked her aggressive questions, trying to make it seem like she was lying, or that she had somehow been responsible for what happened to her. This is a tactic that defence attorneys sometimes use in sexual assault cases, and it can be very harmful to victims. For Veronica, Having to endure this treatment in court while facing the man who had raped her was a nightmare. Finally, in the year 2000, 2 years after the rape, Antonio Cosme was found guilty. The court convicted him of raping Veronica. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison. For Maria and Veronica, this was supposed to be the moment when they could finally start to heal. Cosme would be locked away for 9 years, and they would not have to see him or worry about him during that time. They could try to move forward with their lives. But the legal system had one more terrible surprise in store for them. In 2005, after Cosme had served 5 years of his 9-year sentence, he was granted temporary release from prison. This is sometimes called day release or prison leave. It is a system where prisoners who have served part of their sentence are allowed to leave prison for short periods of time. The idea is that this helps prisoners transition back to normal life and reduces the risk that they will commit crimes again after they are fully released. But in Cosme's case, granting him this privilege was a terrible mistake. What made things even worse was that nobody told Maria or Veronica that Cosme had been released. The authorities did not notify them that the man who had raped Veronica was back in their town. They had no warning that they might encounter him on the street. In June 2005, Maria was at a bus stop near her home in Benejúzar. It was a normal day, and she was going about her regular business. Suddenly, she saw Antonio Cosme. He was standing right there in front of her. Maria was shocked. She had no idea that Cosme was out of prison. Seeing him was like a punch to the stomach. All the trauma and rage that she had been carrying for the past 7 years came flooding back. But Cosme did not just walk past Maria quietly. Instead, he approached her and spoke to her. He showed no remorse whatsoever for what he had done to her daughter. Instead, he taunted her. He asked her 3 simple words that were meant to hurt and mock her. He said, "How's your daughter?" These 3 words may not seem like much, but in the context of what Cosme had done, they were incredibly cruel. He was not asking about Veronica's well-being because he cared. He was reminding Maria of the rape. He was mocking her and her daughter. He was showing that he had no regret for the terrible crime he had committed. He was, in effect, bragging about what he had done and taunting Maria with the knowledge that he had destroyed her daughter's innocence. For Maria, hearing these words from the man who had raped her child was more than she could bear. She felt a combination of rage, fear, and what can only be described as hysteria. Her mind was overwhelmed with emotion. She could not think clearly. All she knew was that this man had hurt her daughter in the worst way possible, and now he was standing in front of her, free and mocking her. After taunting Maria, Cosme walked away from the bus stop. He went to a local bar in Benejúzar. This was not just any bar. It was a bar that Maria's family frequented, meaning they went there regularly. Cosme knew this. He chose to go to this bar, which was another way of showing that he had no fear and no shame about what he had done. He was back in the town, back in the places where the Garcia family lived their lives, and he was not going to hide or stay away. Maria stood at the bus stop, her mind racing. She could not believe what had just happened. The man who had raped her daughter was free, was in their town, and had just mocked her to her face. Something inside Maria snapped. She made a decision in that moment that would change the rest of her life. Maria did not go home. Instead, she walked to the nearest petrol station. A petrol station is a place where people buy fuel for their cars. In Spanish, petrol is called gasoline or gasolina. Maria went into the petrol station and bought a container of gasoline. She filled the container with fuel, then she walked to the bar where Cosme had gone. When Maria entered the bar, she saw Cosme sitting there. He was relaxed, probably having a drink, not worried about anything. Maria walked up to him. Without saying a word, she poured the gasoline over his head and body. Then she lit a match and set him on fire. The bar erupted in chaos. Flames engulfed Cosme's body. People screamed and tried to help. Someone called for an ambulance. Cosme suffered severe burns over a large portion of his body. Different sources report different percentages, with some saying 60% of his body was burned, and others saying as much as 90%. What is certain is that the burns were extensive and life-threatening. Maria did not stay at the scene. She left the bar immediately after setting Cosme on fire. She wandered through the town in a daze. Eventually, she made her way to the port area of Alicante. She was found there that same evening by the police. When the police questioned her, Maria confessed to what she had done. She told them that she had set Antonio Cosme on fire. Cosme was rushed to a hospital in Valencia, which is a larger city not far from Benejúzar. He was admitted to the hospital with critical injuries. The doctors did everything they could to save his life, but his burns were too severe. Different sources give slightly different timeframes, but most agree that Cosme died between 10 and 11 days after the attack. Some sources say he died a week later, while others say 10 or 11 days later. What is certain is that he died in the hospital from the injuries Maria had inflicted on him. Antonio Cosme was dead, killed by the mother of the girl he had raped. Maria was arrested and charged with murder. The charge in Spanish legal terms was described as malicious murder or intentional homicide. This is the most serious type of murder charge in Spain, and it carries a heavy prison sentence. Maria was held in custody while she awaited trial, but unlike many people charged with murder, Maria received an outpouring of public support. News of what she had done spread across Spain. The story of a mother who had killed her daughter's rapist after he taunted her captured the attention of the entire nation. People were divided in their opinions, but many, perhaps even most, sympathized with Maria. Thousands of people across Spain signed petitions calling for clemency for Maria. Clemency means mercy or leniency from the authorities. People wanted the government to reduce her sentence or pardon her entirely. They argued that Maria had been driven to her actions by unbearable emotional pain and by the failure of the justice system to protect her daughter. They pointed out that Cosme had been released from prison without any warning to the family and that he had then deliberately taunted Maria. They said that any mother in Maria's position might have done the same thing. Community members in Benejúzar organised demonstrations and rallies in support of Maria. They collected signatures and money to help with her legal defence. Professional organisations and political groups added their voices to the calls for mercy. Maria became, in the eyes of many Spaniards, a symbol of a mother's love and of the frustration that victims of crime feel when the legal system seems to let them down. In 2006, shortly after the attack, Maria was granted conditional release. This meant that while she was still charged with murder and awaiting trial, she was allowed to be out of custody while the case moved through the courts. She had already spent about a year in jail immediately after the attack. During this time of conditional release, approximately 400 residents of Benejúzar took to the streets to protest. But these protesters were not supporting Maria. They were angry that she was free. They wanted her to be in jail. This shows that even though Maria had widespread support across Spain, there were still people, including some in her own town, who believed that what she had done was wrong and that she should be punished severely. Maria's trial took place over the following years. Her lawyer was a man named Joaquín Gallant. Gallant argued that Maria had been suffering from a temporary mental disorder at the time she set Cosme on fire. He said that Maria had been pushed beyond her breaking point by years of trauma and stress following the rape of her daughter. He argued that when Cosme taunted her, something in Maria's mind broke, and she was no longer able to control her actions or think rationally. This is called a defense of temporary insanity or temporary mental disorder. The idea is that Maria was not in her right mind at the time she committed the act, and therefore she should not be held fully responsible for what she did. Maria also gave her own explanation for her actions. She said that her intention was not to kill Cosme. She said she only wanted to scare him or seriously hurt him. She wanted to make him understand and feel the pain that he had put her daughter through. She wanted him to suffer the way Veronica had suffered. Maria said that she had not planned to kill him, but rather to make him feel the horror and pain that he had inflicted on an innocent child. In July 2009, 4 years after the attack, Maria del Carmen Garcia was convicted of murder. The court found her guilty and sentenced her to 9.5 years in prison. This was a significant sentence, and it meant that Maria would spend a large portion of her life behind bars. But the case was not over. Maria's lawyer immediately appealed the sentence to a higher court. In Spain, as in many countries, people who are convicted of crimes have the right to appeal to a higher court and ask for the conviction or sentence to be changed. In 2010, the Supreme Court of Spain reviewed Maria's case. The Supreme Court is the highest court in Spain, and its decisions are final. The Supreme Court looked at all the evidence and arguments in the case. They considered the defense of temporary mental disorder that Maria's lawyer had presented. The Supreme Court agreed that Maria had been suffering from a temporary mental disorder at the time she set Cosme on fire. They accepted that the trauma of her daughter's rape, combined with the shock of seeing Cosme free and being taunted by him, had caused Maria to enter a state of temporary insanity. Based on this finding, the Supreme Court reduced Maria's sentence from 9.5 years to 5.5 years. This was a significant reduction. It meant that Maria would spend 4 fewer years in prison. The reduced sentence was seen as a partial victory for Maria and her supporters. It acknowledged that while what she had done was still a crime, there were extreme mitigating circumstances that made her less culpable than someone who commits a premeditated murder in cold blood. Even with the reduced sentence, Maria still faced years in prison. But the public campaign for her release did not stop. Thousands of people continued to sign petitions. More than 5,000 signatures were collected and submitted to authorities in Elche, a city near Benejúzar, calling for Maria's release. Professional organizations, political groups, and ordinary citizens kept the pressure on the Spanish government. They argued that Maria had suffered enough, that she had no criminal record before this incident, and that she posed no danger to society. They said that keeping her in prison served no purpose, and that she should be allowed to go free and rebuild her life with her daughter. In May 2011, court officials made a surprising announcement. They cited special circumstances and decided to suspend Maria's sentence. This meant that Maria would not have to serve the full 5.5 years in prison. The court took into account that Maria had no previous criminal record and that she had pleaded temporary insanity at the time of the offence. They also noted that she had already served a total of 1 year and 10 days in prison, counting both the time immediately after the attack and the time she had served since being sentenced. The court decided that this was sufficient, and Maria was released from prison. She was finally free. Maria went to live with her daughter Veronica in the city of Murcia, which is not far from Benejúzar. Mother and daughter were reunited, and they tried to build a new life together, away from the town where so much trauma had occurred. For a while, it seemed that Maria's ordeal was over. She was out of prison, she was with her daughter, and she could try to move forward. But the legal system was not finished with Maria yet. In 2013, 2 years after her release, Maria was told that she had to return to prison. The details of why this happened are not entirely clear from the available sources, but it appears that there were legal challenges to the decision to release her. Some authorities argued that the suspension of her sentence had been inappropriate, or that Maria should serve more time. Whatever the reason, Maria was ordered back into custody. This was devastating for Maria and for her supporters, who had fought so hard to get her released. In May 2014, Maria del Carmen Garcia began serving the remainder of her sentence at Fontcalent prison in Alicante province. She was emotional and distraught as she headed to prison. She had appeared on 2 separate Spanish television shows to plead her case and tell her story. With her daughter Veronica and her lawyer Joaquin Gallant by her side, Maria cried out, "I cannot take any more," as she headed to court. After the court refused to grant a stay of the sentence, Maria entered Fontcalent prison. She told reporters, "My ordeal is over," before spending her first night behind bars. But her ordeal was not over. She still had years left to serve on her sentence. While Maria was in prison, her lawyer continued to fight for her release. Gallant made multiple requests to the court to suspend Maria's sentence on the grounds that she was suffering from a serious mental illness. The Spanish Criminal Code has a provision that states that no person with a serious and irreversible disease should be imprisoned. Gallant argued that Maria qualified under this provision because of the mental health problems she had developed as a result of the trauma of her daughter's rape and the stress of the legal proceedings. But the court rejected these requests multiple times. The appeals were denied, and Maria remained in prison. Supporters of Maria, including 20 professional and political organizations, twice asked the Spanish government to use its power to pardon convicted criminals. In Spain, the government has the authority to grant pardons in exceptional cases. A pardon would mean that Maria would be forgiven for her crime and released from prison without having to serve the rest of her sentence. But the Spanish government refused both requests. They did not grant Maria a pardon, and she remained behind bars. In November 2017, there was finally some good news for Maria. After serving several years in prison, she was granted day release. This meant that Maria was allowed to leave prison during the day to work or attend to personal matters, but she had to return to Fontcalent prison every night to sleep. This was a step toward freedom, but Maria was still not fully free. She had to report to the prison every evening and spend the night in a cell. Then, in December 2017, the prison authorities approved a new arrangement. Maria was allowed to wear an electronic bracelet instead of returning to prison each night. An electronic bracelet is a device that is attached to a person's ankle and uses GPS technology to track their location. With this system, the authorities could monitor Maria's whereabouts 24 hours a day. She was required to stay at home during 7 specific hours each night, and the bracelet would alert the authorities if she left her home during those hours. This meant that Maria no longer had to sleep in prison. She could stay at home with her daughter. She was almost free, but she was still under supervision. The case of Maria del Carmen Garcia became one of the most controversial and widely discussed cases in Spain in the early 2000s. It sparked intense debate about vigilante justice, the rights of victims, and the failures of the legal system to protect people from repeat offenders. Many people saw Maria as a hero, a mother who had been pushed to the breaking point and who had done what she felt was necessary to defend her daughter's honour and to punish a man who had shown no remorse for his terrible crime. These supporters argued that the legal system had failed Maria and Veronica by releasing Cosme from prison without warning and by not giving him a longer sentence in the first place. They said that if the system had worked properly, Maria would never have been put in the position of seeing her daughter's rapist free and taunting her on the street. Others argued that what Maria did was wrong, regardless of the circumstances. They said that taking the law into your own hands is never acceptable in a civilized society. They pointed out that Maria had deliberately killed another human being and that murder is one of the most serious crimes a person can commit. They argued that no matter how terrible Cosme's crime had been, he had a right to a fair trial and to serve his sentence without being killed by vigilantes. They worried that if Maria was let off too easily, it would send a message that vigilante justice is acceptable, and this could lead to more violence and a breakdown of the rule of law. The case also highlighted serious problems with how sexual assault cases are handled in Spain and in many other countries. Veronica had to face her attacker in open court with no separation screens. She was questioned aggressively by defense attorneys who tried to make it seem like she was lying or responsible for what happened. The trial took years to complete, and then, when Cosme was finally convicted and sent to prison, he was released after just 5 years without any notification to the family. All of these failures made the trauma worse for Veronica and her mother. The case became a reflection of an era where sexual abuse was not treated seriously enough, and where the judicial system seemed to be weighted against the victim rather than in favour of protecting them. In 2024, the story of Maria del Carmen Garcia was turned into a 3-part documentary series that streamed on HBO Max in Spain. The series featured interviews with Maria herself and with her daughter, Veronica Rodriguez Garcia. The documentary explored the events that led up to the attack on Cosme, the aftermath, and the years of legal battles that followed. The series brought the case back into the public eye and sparked new discussions about justice, revenge, and the treatment of sexual assault victims in the legal system. The case of Maria del Carmen Garcia is a tragedy on multiple levels. It is the tragedy of a young girl who was raped by a neighbour and who had to endure a long and difficult trial to see her attacker convicted. It is the tragedy of a mother who loved her daughter so much that she was willing to throw away her own freedom to make her daughter's rapist pay. It is the tragedy of a justice system that failed to protect a vulnerable family and that then had to decide how to punish a woman who had taken the law into her own hands. And it is a story that continues to divide people and raise difficult questions about right and wrong, justice and revenge, and how we as a society should respond when the legal system fails to deliver the protection and justice that victims deserve. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 5. Case number Poovanchari Thekavitil Sankara Narayanan lived in Elangor, which is in the Manjeri area of Malappuram district in the state of Kerala, India. Kerala is located in the southern part of India along the coast. Malappuram is one of the districts in Kerala, and it is known for its beautiful landscape, with hills, forests and rural villages. Sankara Narayanan and his wife Santhakumari lived a simple life in their village. They raised cattle to make a living. This means they kept cows and other animals and sold milk and other products from these animals to earn money. Sankara Narayanan and Santhakumari had 3 children. They had 2 sons, and after their sons, they had a daughter. Their daughter was named Krishna Priya. She was born after her 2 brothers, and she was the youngest child in the family. Krishna Priya was precious to her parents. She was described as the apple of their eyes, which is an expression that means someone who is deeply loved and cherished. Krishna Priya was a bright and happy child. By 2001, she was 13 years old and studying in class 7, which is also called the 7th Standard or 7th grade. She attended PMSA High School in Yelahanka, which was near their home in Manjeri. The Narayanan family lived in a small, close-knit community where everyone knew each other. Their neighbours included a man named Ahmed Koya. Some sources call him Mohammed Koya or just Koya. He was 24 years old in 2001. Koya lived very close to the Narayanan family. Their houses were less than 20 metres away from each other, which means they were neighbours who could easily see each other's home. Koya was known in the area, and he had a relationship with the Narayanan family. They were on friendly terms and on visiting terms, which means they would visit each other's homes and talk like neighbours do. But Ahmed Koya was not the good person he appeared to be. He had a criminal record, meaning he had been arrested and convicted of crimes before. According to court documents and news reports, Koya was known for leading what was described as an immoral life. He had a bad reputation, and he was known as someone who engaged in criminal activities. On February 9th, 2001, Krishna Priya went to school like she did every day. She was a normal 13-year-old girl, a 7th standard student who went to school, studied, and spent time with her family. That afternoon, Krishna Priya left school and began walking home. The route from her school to her home was a path that she knew well. She had walked it many times before, but on this particular day, February 9th, 2001, Krishna Priya did not make it home. When Krishna Priya did not return from school at the expected time, her parents became worried. They went looking for her. Sankara Narayanan searched the area around their home. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. About 200 metres away from their home, in a bushy area near the wilderness, Sankara Narayanan found his daughter's body. Krishna Priya was dead. Her body had been brutally torn apart. The scene was so horrific that when Sankara Narayanan found her under the dim glow of a petrol lamp, which is a small lamp that uses kerosene or petrol to create light, he could barely recognise his beloved daughter. Krishna Priya had been raped and murdered. She had been sexually assaulted and then killed. The violence that had been done to this 13-year-old child was unspeakable. For any parent, finding their child's body in such a condition is the worst nightmare imaginable. For Sankara Narayanan, his entire world collapsed in that moment. The police were immediately called and they began their investigation. They arrested Ahmed Koya, the neighbour who lived just 20 metres away from the Narayanan family. During the investigation, the police recovered Krishna Priya's gold jewellery from Koya. In India, it is common for children to wear gold jewellery, especially girls. The fact that Koya had Krishna Priya's jewellery was strong evidence linking him to the crime. Koya was arrested and charged with the rape and murder of Krishna Priya. The case went through the legal system. Koya was convicted of the crime. This meant that a court found him guilty of raping and murdering the 13-year-old girl. He was sentenced and sent to prison. For Sankara Narayanan and his wife, this conviction was supposed to bring some measure of justice. Their daughter was gone, and nothing could bring her back. But at least the man who had killed her would be in prison, and would be punished for what he had done. The trauma of losing Krishna Priya in such a violent and horrific way destroyed the Narayanan family. Sankara Narayanan was so traumatized by what had happened that he was unable to sleep inside his house again. The memory of his daughter and the horror of finding her body was too much for him to bear. He and his wife were shattered. They were living less than 20 metres away from where Koya's family lived, and every day they had to see that house and be reminded of what Koya had done to their daughter. The pain was unbearable. But then, something happened that made everything even worse. About 1 year after Koya was convicted and sent to prison, he was released on bail. Bail is a legal process where someone who has been accused or convicted of a crime is allowed to be free while their case continues through the court system or while they await further legal proceedings. In India, as in many countries, people can sometimes be granted bail even after being convicted if there are appeals or other legal processes ongoing. The decision to grant Koya bail was devastating for the Narayanan family. The man who had raped and murdered their 13-year-old daughter was back in their village, walking free on the streets, just 1 year after being convicted of this heinous crime. When Koya returned to the village on bail, something unexpected happened. Despite everything that Koya had done, Sankara Narayanan maintained a calm face when he interacted with Koya. On the surface, Sankara Narayanan appeared to accept that Koya was back. Over the next several months, an unlikely friendship appeared to develop between Sankara Narayanan and Ahmed Koya. They were seen talking to each other. They visited each other's homes. To people in the village, it looked like Sankara Narayanan had somehow forgiven Koya or had accepted the situation. But this was not the truth. Inside, Sankara Narayanan was filled with pain and rage. He was devastated that the man who had killed his daughter was free and living in the same village, just a few meters away from his home. Every day, he had to see Koya. Every day, he was reminded of what Koya had done to Krishnapriya, and every day the injustice of the situation ate away at him. Sankara Narayanan made a decision. He decided that he would take matters into his own hands. He decided that he would kill Ahmed Koya. On the night of June 27, 2002, more than a year after Krishnapriya's murder and several months after Koya had been released on bail, something happened to Ahmed Koya. Koya went missing. His family did not know where he was. On July 4, 2002, Koya's brother filed a complaint with the police, saying that Koya was missing. The police launched a search to try to find him. On July 6, 2002, 2 days after the complaint was filed, the police found Koya's body. His body was discovered in an unused well near the Narayanan family's house. The body had been there for several days. When the police recovered Koya's body, they conducted a post-mortem examination. A post-mortem is also called an autopsy. It is a medical examination of a dead body to determine how the person died. The post-mortem on Koya's body revealed that he had died from gunshot wounds. He had been shot multiple times. 7 pellets were extracted from Koya's body. The post-mortem report showed that Koya had died as a result of gunshot injuries to his chest and abdomen. He had been killed with a shotgun. The police immediately suspected Sankara Narayanan. They arrested him and questioned him. Sankara Narayanan confessed. He admitted that he had killed Ahmed Koya. He told the police that he had shot Koya to death. Sankara Narayanan said that he had avenged his daughter's death by gunning down the man who had raped and murdered her. After confessing to the police, Sankara Narayanan surrendered himself. He did not try to run away or hide. He accepted that he had killed Koya and that he would face the legal consequences of his actions. Along with Sankara Narayanan, 2 other people were also arrested in connection with Koya's murder. The police believe that these 2 people had helped Sankara Narayanan kill Koya or had been involved in some way. All 3 of them were charged with murder. The case went to trial at the Additional District and Sessions Court, which is a type of court in India that handles serious criminal cases. This particular court was a fast-track court in Manjeri. Fast-track courts are special courts that are designed to handle cases more quickly than regular courts. The trial took place over several months. On October 20, 2002, just a few months after Koya's body was found, the Manjeri Sessions Court delivered its verdict. The court found Sankara Narayanan and the 2 others guilty of murder. All 3 of them were sentenced to life imprisonment. Life imprisonment in India is a very serious sentence. It means that a person is sent to prison for the rest of their life, or at least for a very long time. For Sankara Narayanan, this meant that he would spend the rest of his days in prison for killing the man who had raped and murdered his daughter. He was sent to jail to serve his sentence. While Sankara Narayanan was in prison, something unexpected happened. He began receiving letters from people all over Kerala and even from other parts of India. These letters were from other parents, people who had heard about his case and who felt deep sympathy for him. The letters addressed him as "Dearest Father." The people who wrote these letters said that they understood his pain. They said that they could imagine what he must have felt when his daughter was killed and when her killer was released on bail. Many of these parents said that they might have done the same thing if they were in his situation. Sankara Narayanan's case had touched the hearts of many people. He became a symbol of a father's grief and of the frustration that victims feel when the justice system seems to fail them. But Sankara Narayanan's legal case was not over. His lawyers filed an appeal with the Kerala High Court. An appeal is when someone who has been convicted of a crime asks a higher court to review the case and decide if the conviction was correct. The Kerala High Court is the highest court in the state of Kerala. It has the power to overturn decisions made by lower courts if it finds that there were errors or problems with the original trial. Sankara Narayanan's appeal argued that the lower court had made mistakes and that he should not have been convicted of murder. The Kerala High Court reviewed the case carefully. The judges looked at all the evidence that had been presented at the original trial. They considered the arguments made by Sankara Narayanan's lawyers, and in May 2006, 4 years after Sankara Narayanan had been convicted by the lower court, the Kerala High Court made a surprising decision. The court acquitted Sankara Narayanan This meant that the High Court found that there was not enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Sankara Narayanan had killed Ahmed Koya. The two other people who had been convicted along with Sankara Narayanan were also acquitted. The Kerala High Court's judgment included some important observations. The court acknowledged several key facts about the case. The court said, "It is no doubt fully established that a teenaged school-going daughter of A1 was raped and murdered." A1 refers to accused number 1, which was Sankara Narayanan. So the court confirmed that it was definitely true that Sankara Narayanan's teenage daughter had been raped and killed. The court also said, "It is further fully established that for this heinous crime, the deceased Ahmed Koya was facing trial and was on bail when he was done to death." This means the court confirmed that Koya had been accused of the crime, was on bail, and was then killed. The court also noted that there had been a friendly relationship between Sankara Narayanan and Koya, and that they had been on visiting terms with each other. The court said, "This fact would add fuel to the fire, and A1 would be emotionally highly charged to avenge for the rape and murder of his daughter at the hands of a friend." So the court acknowledged that Sankara Narayanan had a very strong motive to want to kill Koya. The court understood that any father would be emotionally charged and would want revenge after his daughter was raped and murdered, especially when the killer was someone he had considered a friend. But having a motive is not the same thing as being guilty. In a criminal trial, the prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused person actually committed the crime. The court found that while Sankara Narayanan certainly had a motive, there was not enough concrete evidence to prove that he was definitely the one who killed Koya. The court made another very important observation. The judges noted that Ahmed Koya had led a life of crime. The court described Koya as someone who had a hoary past and was leading an immoral life. Hoary past is a phrase that means someone has a long history of bad behaviour. The court said that because of Koya's criminal background and immoral lifestyle, he would have no dearth of enemies. The phrase "no dearth of enemies" means that Koya had many enemies. There were many people who might have wanted to kill Koya for various reasons. The court reasoned that while Sankara Narayanan was certainly one person who had a motive to kill Koya, there could have been many other people who also wanted Koya dead. Because there were other potential suspects, the court could not say with certainty that Sankara Narayanan was the killer. The court said that the prosecution had not provided enough evidence to conclusively prove that Sankara Narayanan was the one who shot Koya. Therefore, the court acquitted him. This was a controversial decision. Many people believe that Sankara Narayanan had definitely killed Koya, and that his confession to the police should have been enough to convict him. But under Indian law and under most legal systems, there are rules about what kind of evidence can be used in court, and how much evidence is needed to prove someone guilty. The High Court found that there were problems with the evidence, and that the case had not been proven strongly enough. So Sankara Narayanan was set free. After spending years in prison, Sankara Narayanan was released and returned to his village, but his life was never the same. The trauma of losing Krishnapriya stayed with him every single day. According to people who knew him, Sankara Narayanan would cry almost every day when he thought about his daughter. The memories of Krishnapriya brought him to tears constantly. He was haunted by what had happened to her. Even though Koya was dead and could never hurt anyone else, Krishnapriya was still gone. Nothing could bring her back. Sankara Narayanan lived with this pain for the rest of his life. After his release from prison, Sankara Narayanan continued to live in Elangor. Interestingly, despite everything that had happened, Sankara Narayanan maintained a cordial relationship with Koya's relatives. Cordial means polite and friendly. He avoided walking past Koya's house, but when he encountered Koya's family members, he was polite to them. This shows that Sankara Narayanan's anger was directed at Koya specifically, not at Koya's entire family. He understood that Koya's family members were not responsible for what Koya had done. Sankara Narayanan's story became well known across Kerala and throughout India. The case sparked intense debate about vigilante justice, about the rights of victims, and about failures in the legal system. Many people sympathized with Sankara Narayanan and felt that he had been justified in killing Koya. These people argued that the justice system had failed Sankara Narayanan and his family by releasing Koya on bail after he had been convicted of such a horrible crime. They said that if a man who raped and murdered a 13-year-old girl can be let out of prison after just 1 year, then what kind of justice system is that? They felt that Sankara Narayanan had done what any father would do when faced with such an injustice. They said that while taking the law into your own hands is not ideal, it is understandable when the legal system fails so completely. Other people argued that what Sankara Narayanan did was wrong, regardless of the circumstances. They said that in a civilized society, no one should take the law into their own hands. They pointed out that vigilante justice is dangerous, because if everyone who feels wronged decides to kill the person who hurt them, society will descend into chaos. They said that even though Koya had committed a terrible crime, he still had legal rights, and he had the right to go through the legal process without being murdered. These people argued that the High Court's decision to acquit Sankara Narayanan sent a bad message. They worried that it would encourage other people to commit vigilante justice. In 2009, 8 years after Krishna Priya's death, a Malayalam film called Vairam was released. Malayalam is the language spoken in Kerala. Vairam was a movie that was based on the story of Sankara Narayanan and Krishna Priya. The film was directed by M.A. Nishad and featured well-known actors including Pasupathi, Suresh Gopi, Jayasuriya, Mukesh, Samvrutha Sunil, and Danya Mary Varghese. The movie told the tragic story of a father whose daughter was raped and murdered, and who then took revenge on her killer. The film brought renewed attention to the case and sparked fresh discussions about justice and revenge. For Sankara Narayanan and his family, seeing their personal tragedy turned into a film was both painful and perhaps cathartic. The film immortalized Krishna Priya's story and ensured that people would remember what had happened to her. Sankara Narayanan lived for many more years after the High Court acquitted him. He continued to live in Elangur with his wife. He remained haunted by the memory of his daughter. Every February 9th, the anniversary of Krishna Priya's death was especially difficult for him. He would think about how old Krishna Priya would have been if she had lived. He would imagine what her life might have been like. He grieved not just for the daughter he had lost, but for all the experiences she would never have, all the milestones she would never reach. On April 8th, 2025, Sankara Narayanan passed away. He was 75 years old. He died from age-related illnesses. He had lived 24 years after Krishna Priya's death and 23 years after Koya's death. Those 24 years had been marked by grief, trauma, and the memory of the tragedy that had destroyed his family. When Sankara Narayanan died, he was still remembered across Kerala as the father who had avenged his daughter's murder. Some people remembered him as a hero, a man who had done what he felt was necessary when the legal system failed him. Others remembered him as a cautionary tale, a reminder that vigilante justice, no matter how understandable, is not the solution to the failures of the legal system. If Krishna Priya had lived, she would have been 37 years old in 2025 when her father died. She would have finished school, gone to college, perhaps gotten married and had children of her own. Sankara Narayanan would have been a grandfather, enjoying his old age surrounded by his children and grandchildren. But none of that happened. Krishna Priya's life was cut short at age 13 by a brutal act of violence, and Sankara Narayanan spent the last 24 years of his life living with the pain of that loss. The case of Sankara Narayanan and Krishna Priya remains one of the most tragic and controversial cases in Kerala's recent history. It raises difficult questions about justice, about how society should deal with horrific crimes, and about what happens when the legal system fails to provide the justice that victims and their families deserve. It is a story that touches on the deepest human emotions: grief, rage, love, and the desire for justice. And it is a story that forces people to confront uncomfortable questions about right and wrong, about law and morality, and about the limits of what is acceptable, even in the face of unspeakable tragedy. Sankara Narayanan's story is not a story with a clear moral or a simple lesson. It is simply a story of a father who lost his daughter in the most horrible way, who felt that the legal system had failed him, and who decided to take justice into his own hands. Whether his actions were right or wrong is something that people will continue to debate for years to come. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the final case of the video, case number 6. On Saturday, June 9th, 2012, a father in Lavaca County, Texas, became part of a story that would spread across the world in just days. The events that unfolded on his family ranch that afternoon raised questions about justice, about the law, and about what a parent would do to protect their child. China is a small town in Texas, located about 130 miles west of Houston, and 80 miles east of San Antonio. The town has around 2,000 people living within its limits, with another 1,500 or so spread out on the outskirts. Shiner built its identity around the Sputzel Brewery, which produces Shiner beer, one of the best-selling independent beers in the United States. The town is so proud of its brewery that even gas stations in the area serve Shiner beer on tap. Shiner residents like to describe their home with a phrase displayed on the highway welcome sign that greets visitors: "The cleanest little city in Texas." For a town this size, serious crime was rare. In the 8 years leading up to June 2012, the Lavaca County Sheriff's Office had only investigated 6 homicides. Half of those were part of a single triple murder case. This was a place where people knew their neighbours, where children could play outside, where families felt safe. But on that Saturday in June, something happened that shattered that peace. The father at the centre of this story was 23 years old. He lived with his family on a ranch off a quiet 2-lane county road between Shiner and the nearby town of Yoakum. The ranch property belonged to his father. It was remote, the kind of place where cell phone signals were weak and emergency services had trouble finding the exact location. The front yard of the home looked like a place built for children. Blue pinwheels stuck into patchy grass, an above-ground swimming pool, a swing set, a trampoline, a couple of ropes dangling from a tree for swinging, a partial privacy fence painted powder blue. The family kept horses and chickens on the property. The father was described by neighbours and people who knew him as a peaceable soul, a good kid who had never been in any trouble his entire life. Michael James Veit, who lived across the road from where the attack happened, had a son who graduated from Shiner High School with the father in 2007. Veit remembered the father as just like a regular kid, went to dances, drank beer like the rest of the kids around here. The father was polite enough that he would always ask permission before searching Veit's property for animals that had wandered off the ranch, even though the families had known each other for a long time. The father was described as easygoing, the kind of person who said "yes sir" and "no ma'am" so much it sometimes made other young adults in town look bad by comparison. This was not someone with a history of violence or trouble with the law. This was a young man trying to raise his family and make ends meet. On the afternoon of Saturday, June 9th, 2012, the father and his family had gathered at the ranch. Different sources describe the gathering in slightly different ways. Some reports say it was a barbecue. Other reports say the adults were shoeing a horse. What is clear is that there were 7 people present that day. 4 were family members, 2 were acquaintances, and 1 was a stranger to the family. The stranger was a man named Jesus Mora Flores. Flores was 47 years old and lived in Gonzales, Texas. He was not born in the United States but was in the country legally with a permanent resident card, commonly called a green card. Flores had been hired by the family before to help with horses on the ranch. He was described in various reports as a horse groomer or a ranch hand. On this particular day, Flores had either been invited to the barbecue or had come to the property with a family friend. The exact nature of how Flores came to be there varies slightly in different accounts, but what happened next is documented with brutal clarity. While the adults were occupied with their work, the father sent his young daughter and her son off to feed the family's chickens. The daughter was 5 years old. Early reports gave her age as 4, but authorities later confirmed she was 5. She and her brother walked toward the barn and chicken coop to take care of the animals. It was a normal task, something the children had probably done many times before, but this time, something went horribly wrong. A witness at the scene saw Flores grab the little girl. The witness watched as Flores forcibly carried the girl away from the area where she was supposed to be feeding the chicken. He carried her toward a secluded area on the property, toward a small isolated shack near the barn. The girl's brother saw what was happening. The boy saw Flores take his sister. Some accounts say the brother ran to find his father. Other accounts say the brother told his grandfather, who was also present that day. Regardless of exactly who the boy alerted first, the message got to the father quickly. Someone had taken his daughter. The father heard his daughter screaming. The sound came from the direction of the secluded area where Flores had taken her. The father began running. He ran toward the screams of his child. When he reached the shack, when he burst inside, he found a scene that no parent should ever have to witness. Flores was on top of the little girl. Both Flores and the girl had their underwear removed. According to authorities, when emergency medical personnel arrived later, they found that Flores's pants and underwear were down and his genitals were exposed. The father saw all of this in an instant. He saw a 47-year-old man sexually assaulting his 5-year-old daughter. The father reacted instantly. He grabbed Flores and pulled him off his daughter. Then he began hitting Flores. He used his fists. He struck Flores in the head and neck area. He hit him multiple times. Witnesses and investigators later described it as the father inflicting several blows to the man's head and neck area. The father was not armed with any weapon. He used only his hands, but the force of his blows was enough to cause severe damage. Flores stopped moving. He became unresponsive. The father stepped back and realized what had happened. Flores was badly hurt. Flores might be dying. The father's reaction at this point reveals something important about his state of mind and his intentions. He did not try to hide what he had done. He did not run. He did not leave Flores there to die without trying to get help. Instead, the father immediately called 911. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed for emergency services. The recording of that 911 call was later played at a news conference, and it revealed a man who was panicked, desperate, and frantic with fear that Flores might die. The call lasted nearly 5 minutes. From the very first moment, the father was screaming and crying. His voice was so loud at times that the recording became hard to understand. He told the dispatcher that he had beaten up a man who was raping his daughter. He begged the dispatcher to send an ambulance. He shouted that he needed help and that he did not know what to do. But there was a problem. The ranch was so remote, so isolated, that the 911 dispatcher could not locate the property. The dispatcher asked for directions, asked for landmarks, asked for any information that could help emergency crews find the ranch. The father grew more and more frantic. He knew Flores was badly injured. He knew time was running out. He could see Flores lying there, unresponsive, possibly dying, and the dispatcher could not figure out where he was. The father started screaming at the dispatcher. He used profanity. He shouted, "Come on, this guy is going to die on me. I do not know what to do." At one point, out of pure desperation, the father told the dispatcher that he was going to put Flores in his truck and drive him to a hospital himself. He shouted, "He is going to die. He is going to die." The fear and panic in his voice were obvious to anyone who heard the recording. This was not a man who was calm or collected or proud of what he had done. This was a man who was terrified that he had killed someone and was desperate to save that person's life. The father's family also tried to help Flores. After the father made the 911 call, other family members at the scene attempted to save Flores. The girl's grandfather and the girl's aunt both performed CPR on Flores. They tried to keep him alive until the ambulance could arrive. The family worked on Flores despite what they had just witnessed him doing to the little girl. Lavaca County District Attorney Heather McMinn later stated publicly that the father called 911 and he and his family tried to save the life of alleged attacker Jesus Mora Flores despite what they had just witnessed. This detail is important because it shows that the father and his family were not trying to kill Flores or let him die. They were trying to save him. Eventually, emergency crews did find the ranch. They arrived at the scene and found Flores lying on the ground. His pants and underwear were pulled down around his ankles. His body was lifeless. Medical personnel examined him and determined that there was nothing they could do. Flores was dead. A justice of the peace declared him dead at the scene. Later, an autopsy would determine that Flores died from blunt force head and neck injury. The injuries to his head and neck had been severe enough to kill him. The little girl was taken from the scene immediately. She was transported to a hospital where doctors examined her. The examination was thorough. Doctors collected forensic evidence. The results of that examination confirmed what the father and the witnesses had said. The little girl had been sexually assaulted. The physical evidence on her body, combined with the witness accounts and the physical evidence found on Flores, all supported the same conclusion. Flores had been in the process of sexually assaulting the 5-year-old girl when her father found them. In the hours and days after Flores died, law enforcement conducted a full investigation. The Lavaca County Sheriff's Office led the investigation, with assistance from the Texas Rangers. They interviewed the father. They interviewed every witness who had been present at the ranch that day. They examined the physical evidence from the scene. They reviewed the results of the girl's medical examination. They listened to the 911 call. They gathered every piece of information they could find. Sheriff Micah Harmon stated publicly that nothing suggested the beating death happened for any reason other than what the father told them. Harmon said the father was just doing what he thought he had to do to protect his daughter. All of the witness statements and physical evidence in the case matched up with the father's statement. There were no contradictions. There were no inconsistencies. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The father was described by authorities as very remorseful. He was upset about what had happened. He had not intended to kill Flores. He had been trying to protect his daughter, and in the heat of that moment, with the image of his child being assaulted right in front of him, he had reacted with a force that turned out to be deadly. Vian Huser, the attorney who represented the father, described him as a peaceable soul who had no intention to kill anybody that day. Huser emphasized this point multiple times when speaking to reporters. The father was not a violent person. He was not someone who went looking for trouble. He was a father who had walked into the worst nightmare any parent could imagine, and he had reacted instinctively to protect his child. The father was never arrested. Sheriff Harmon made the decision not to arrest the father at the scene, or in the immediate aftermath of Flores' death. Harmon stated that he did not anticipate arresting the father. The district attorney, Heather McMinn, supported this decision, saying that Sheriff Harmon made the right decision in not arresting the father at the time of the incident. However, because a man had died, the case had to be investigated as a homicide. The evidence and the circumstances would be presented to a grand jury, and the grand jury would decide whether the father should face any criminal charges. While the investigation was underway, the people of China and the surrounding area began to speak out. The overwhelming reaction from the community was support for the father. Michael James Veit, the neighbour who lived across the road from the ranch, told reporters any father would have done that. Everybody is saying the father is justified. Veit said he had an 11-year-old son himself, and if anything had happened to his family, he probably would have done worse. At Werner's restaurant in China, customers expressed similar views. Gail Allen, a 59-year-old grandmother of 9, said the father has gone through enough. The little girl is going to be traumatized for life, and the father too for what happened. He was protecting his family. Any parent would do that. At Howard's convenience store, patrons told reporters from the San Antonio Express that they also backed the father. One man, Leroy Wagner, age 79, said, "I think it is great. They should have given him a medal for what he did. Defending his daughter, he was being a responsible father. Any responsible father would have done the same thing." Joe Marek, a 59-year-old local electrician, agreed, saying he was being a responsible father. Any responsible father would have done the same thing. The sentiment was nearly universal in China. People believed the father had done what any parent would do in the same situation. On June 19, 2012, 10 days after Flores died, a Lavaca County grand jury met to review the case. The grand jury heard all the evidence that had been collected by the Sheriff's Department and the Texas Rangers. They listened to the 911 call. They reviewed the forensic evidence. They heard from witnesses. They considered the circumstances of what had happened on that Saturday afternoon. Then the grand jury made their decision. They declined to indict the father. They decided that no criminal charges would be filed against him. District Attorney Heather McMinn held a news conference to announce the decision. She explained the reasoning behind the grand jury's conclusion. McMinn stated that under the law in the state of Texas, deadly force is authorized and justified in order to stop an aggravated sexual assault or sexual assault. She said the substantial amount of evidence showed that the witness statements and the father's statement and what the father had observed was in fact what had happened that day. All the evidence provided by the Sheriff's Department and the Texas Rangers indicated that Flores was committing a sexual assault when the father arrived at the scene. The father had been legally justified in using deadly force to stop that assault and protect his daughter. Philip Hilder, a Houston criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor, was not surprised by the grand jury's decision. He told reporters the grand jury was not about to indict this father for protecting his daughter. Hilder explained that Texas law provides several justifications for the use of deadly force, including if someone commits a sexual assault. The law was clear, and the facts of the case fit within what the law allowed. The attorney for the father, Vian Huser, spoke briefly at the news conference. Huser made it clear that the father and his family would never give interviews about what happened. She asked reporters to respect the family's privacy. Huser stated, "In our opinion, today, the story is over." She emphasized again that the father was a peaceable soul and that he had no intention to kill anybody that day. But Huser also made it clear that the family wanted to move on and did not want to talk about the case anymore. The case was now closed. The father would face no charges. The legal system had determined that his actions were justified. In the aftermath of the grand jury decision, some people tried to contact Flores' family. Investigators had worked with officials from the Mexican consulate to try to locate Flores' relatives. Public records searches turned up no permanent address for Flores in Lavaca County and did not locate any family members. It was not clear if Flores had family in the United States or if his relatives were in Mexico. Authorities said they were unable to locate his family to notify them of his death. Flores remained something of a mystery. He had no prior criminal history. There was no record of him committing any crimes before. He had been living in Gonzales, Texas, working as a ranch hand and horse groomer. The only thing that was known about him now was what he had done on June 9th, 2012, and the fact that he had died as a result. The father's home, after the incident, became a place that was clearly off limits to outsiders. A new no trespassing sign was put up on a gate that blocked the gravelly, shrub-covered path leading to the barn and chicken coop on the ranch. No one answered when reporters tried to visit the father's house. A few miles away, at a home listed as belonging to the father's sister, a woman shouted through the front door that the family had nothing to say. The family wanted privacy. They wanted to be left alone to deal with what had happened. Sheriff Micah Harmon spoke about the impact of the case on everyone involved. Harmon said this case has been very traumatizing on the child, her father, and his entire family. The sheriff acknowledged that while the legal case was over, the emotional and psychological impact of what had happened would last for a very long time. The little girl would have to live with the memory of being assaulted. The father would have to live with the memory of what he had done to stop that assault. The entire family would carry the weight of that day for the rest of their lives. The case raised questions that went beyond the specific facts of what happened on the ranch. People across the country debated whether the father had acted appropriately. Some argued that the father had every right to use deadly force to protect his daughter, and that any parent would have done the same thing. Others questioned whether the father's response had been proportionate. One blow would have been enough to separate Flores from the girl, but the father had hit Flores multiple times in the head and neck until Flores was dead. Was that level of force necessary, or had the father gone too far? David Finkelhor, director of the Crimes Against Children Research Center at the University of New Hampshire, explained why parents might react with such intensity in cases involving sexual abuse. Finkelhor said, "We have an instinctual desire to protect our kids. A sexual threat is seen as a mortal threat against their future and their reputation. It is almost like a trigger where we are completely entitled to feel righteous anger." Finkelhor's comments suggested that the father's reaction, while extreme, was understandable from a psychological standpoint. Parents are hardwired to protect their children, and when they witness their child being harmed, especially in such a horrific way, they may react with a force that goes beyond what might seem rational or proportionate in hindsight. The legal system in Texas sided with the father. The law allowed for the use of deadly force to stop a sexual assault, and the grand jury determined that the father's actions fell within that legal framework. But beyond the legal question, there was a moral and ethical question that did not have a simple answer. The father had killed a man. A man was dead. The father had taken a life. Even if he had done so in defense of his daughter, the father would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. The little girl would have to live with the trauma of what happened to her, and the community of Shiner would always remember June 9th, 2012 as the day when something unthinkable happened in their quiet, peaceful town. The story spread across the world within days. News outlets from around the country and around the globe covered the case. People everywhere had opinions about what the father had done and whether he should face charges. But in Shiner, in the place where the father lived and where everyone knew him, there was little debate. The people who knew the father believed he was a good man who had been put in an impossible situation. They believed he had done what any parent would do. They believed justice had been served when the grand jury declined to indict him. Michael James Veit summed up the feelings of many in the community when he said, "It is sad a man had to die, but I think anybody would have done that." Sonny Janey, another resident of the area, told reporters that Flores got what he deserved, big time. Mark Harabis agreed, saying, "I agree with him totally. I would probably do worse. The family will have to deal with that the rest of their lives. No matter what happens to the father, even if they let him go, he and his child will have to deal with that the rest of their lives." These comments reflected a sentiment that was common in the community. Flores had committed an act that many people viewed as deserving of the harshest possible punishment. The fact that he had died as a result of the father's actions was seen by many as a form of justice, even if it was not the kind of justice that would be handed down by a court. There were no winners in this situation. Flores was dead. The father had killed someone. The little girl had been sexually assaulted and would carry the psychological scars of that trauma for the rest of her life. The family had been torn apart by what happened, and a community had lost its sense of safety and peace. The cleanest little city in Texas had been forced to confront one of the ugliest crimes imaginable. The case of the unnamed father in Jesus Mora Flores became a story about the limits of the law, about the instinct to protect one's children, and about the terrible consequences that can follow when the worst possible thing happens to a family. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.